Yeah, my dog just looked up from the couch. What's going on?
All right. Stream is up. Tweet is out.
Oh, tweet's out.
The tweet is up. Do we get to see who's listening? Is there a way we could see how many people are popping in? Can I shit talk people? Hey,
If you go to
get out
if
of
you go to
here.
twitch.tv/Xerxes, there's
okay.
the chat and stuff like that.
Okay.
We generally ignore chat unless they're actually asking like pertinent questions. We treat it more like we're just recording a podcast that happens to be live.
Yeah, I got you.
Today has been a day already.
Broke internet.
Broke internet.
Mm.
Woke up real sore.
No tonic. Did
My
we
cat
has
randomize
moved.
the order? Did we
Do
randomize
what?
the order? Did we randomize our order?
Oh,
I just know what
the
I'm
order.
synopsizing.
The order of shows.
Just don't let me do it first. Just don't. I
No,
don't wanna
actually, you're
synopsize first.
last.
You'll be last.
Okay. Okay. Good. All right. Good. I'll listen to the pros.
I'm not sure if I would call us pros per se, but
This is your domain.
we've been doing it for a while.
Man, sometimes we get rolling and we've got real good synopsis. Like, what was that one Dean did recently?
Oh, the
22/7 was it?
Yeah. That was a good one.
And sometimes it's like this show is boring and there's nothing I can do to explain it in a way that's not equally as boring as the show.
I was gonna say I really hope my synopsis is good.
I posted the order of the shows, and I'll also
good.
post the questions that we ask. I know you have them, but I'll just post them in the chat just to have it be redundant.
Oh,
Did we settle on a catchphrase?
no, I was about to ask.
Go in and punch it into the chat so we don't spoil anything.
Which questions? The ones like, did the premise interest you? Did the production impress you? That one? Okay. So
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So I did this right. Okay. I prepped. Very good.
Bird did show prep.
Yeah, wild, man. Wild.
The other thing, I don't know if Dean mentioned, we also come up with like funny titles for the first episode. So like after we synopsize it, we'll like when we give our ratings, we'll say like Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex episode 1, and then you give like the fake title that you would give it.
Oh, good. I'll do that right now. I already have mine.
Sweet.
Nice. I had a real hard time coming up with titles this week.
I did it, but I think like only a couple of them are actually funny.
Chris, which one of these sign-offs do you want to go with?
I liked the Bebop one. I think actually, I guess they were both Bebop. The second one, I think that kind of is classic.
I agree.
I actually need to do mine real quick. I was thinking about it, but I don't have one.
So you're titling, Dino. Which one are you doing?
We generally will do them for each of them. So like when you give your scores, you'll and it's like it's voluntary. You don't have to do the titles, but it is a good opportunity for jokes. If you do so you do it for like each of them. So when we go through the scores and it's time for you to give your scores, you'll say, Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex episode 1 and then your title.
Yeah, okay, I gotcha. And what is the number system, or is it non-standard? Just make sure it's clear.
The number system is, it gets a point if you answer yes for a question. So it's a total out of 5.
Oh, okay. Got it. All right.
Right. The questions are I think I said in the text, but I can't remember. The questions are binary. So it's like there's no half points. You either it's either yes, I did it. The premise did interest me, or it didn't. It's
good. Okay. All right. Good.
And it's subjective, but it's kind of supposed to be.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. There's going to be some hot takes. That's good. Good. I like the binary because it forces me to make a hot take.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
Man, how long did it take us to finally settle on this rating system? It went through quite a few iterations.
Yeah,
like
I think
4
so.
seasons.
This is 3.0 according to my notes. So I think the first one we had was just 012 for not interested, give it a couple more, keep watching. And then we switched to the 5-point system, but the questions were different. We kept a few of the questions, but I think it was previously did the premise interest you? Or no, it was did the visuals impress you? Did the audio impress you? Did the storytelling impress you? Would you share this with someone else? And did it make you interested to see more? And then we changed that to premise, production, storytelling, enjoyment, and interest.
Right. We folded video and audio into production,
Okay.
and then
Got rid of would you
storytelling is
share this
mostly
with
writing.
someone else, because you get to the point where it's like, I mean, this is a show for someone, and so that question
Right.
kind of lost its meaning.
Mhm.
All right, shall we start with the podcast proper?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Welcome to AniFiles, episode 86. This episode of the podcast proudly sponsored by Cruel Angel's Thesis. I'm your host, Ryan. With us today we have Chris,
Hello.
Dean,
Yeah.
and special guest Bird.
Squaw!
We don't have a camera because it's actually a bird.
And this is a special episode of the podcast. We've started doing these once a season. This time we're talking about classic anime. So each of us chose an anime which is a classic, and we will be rating those in the normal AniFiles rating format.
And if you hear us talk about a show and you're like, that's not classic. Classic means different things to different people. That's part of the reason that we're doing it this way, is because classic doesn't mean one thing.
Basically,
and
shit on Dean for his choice of show is what you're saying.
That's the only one that's maybe debatable. But then the franchise, I think, would be considered a classic, if not
Right.
necessarily the show. So
it's the only one that's a series that's in the franchise. So like, what else am I supposed to do?
and we've shuffled up who's synopsizing. We didn't want the person who picked the show to be the one to summarize the first episode. But then after we review the first episode, like we've done previously, then the person who chose it will sort of sum up the rest of the series too, to kind of give their thoughts on the whole thing. So it should be fun.
So before we get into the shows, Dean, will you press the button so that the listeners
I
know how we
will.
rate the shows?
Yeah, they can hear it. They can listen if they want to listen to how we. I'm sorry, I had to make sure I was at the right level. Here we go.
Here's how the AniFiles rating system works. Our hosts and guests have watched the first episode of the shows we're talking about today. Based on only that first episode, we'll answer 5 yes or no questions. Did the premise interest you? Did the production impress you? Did the storytelling impress you? Did you enjoy the first episode? Did the first episode make you interested to see more? The way we interpret the word impress can make the AniFiles rating system tougher than some. Being decent or merely good won't be enough to stand out, and some of us may have higher standards than others. Each question answered yes earns the show 1 point, adding up to a total between 0 and 5 per host. All of our scores are then combined to derive a cumulative score between 0 and 100%, letting you know at a glance if we collectively liked the show. And now, let's get to our first show.
The first show we're covering today is Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex. I wonder who chose this show.
I don't know. It's a mystery.
Oh man, Ghost in the Shell. So, we open on a shot of the Major doing major things, and
Not minor things, only major things.
yeah, only major things. She does a major flip through the air and lands on top of a guy, and he's real upset at the government. And so she threatens him a little bit.
Me.
But then there's even more major things that the major needs to do. So she lets the guy. Do they just let him go? Like he
I
kind
don't
of
think
just stops
so.
being
I'm pretty
on
sure
screen.
he's like. I'm pretty. It just like kind of cuts, and I think we're meant to assume he's in custody now.
Mhm.
He
I mean, she
blew
also
his
shot
leg
his foot off, so if she
right?
didn't let him go,
Yeah, I
that's
was gonna
kind
say, which
Yeah.
by the way, that was a great gore moment in the show. Was that
Mm.
leg blowing off? Because it was only like 2 frames, but it was very detailed.
Mhm.
They get away with gore in this show because everything's cybernetic. So it's like we're not killing,
Oh.
we're not breaking a person apart. He's
That
got
explains
robot
yeah,
bits.
that explains the geishas, which will happen in a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Major goes and we cut to a scene of a bunch of important people sitting around a table, presumably inside a truck or some mobile. No, it is actually a truck because we get a shot of it later. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs, I want to say, has been taken hostage inside a geisha house by a bunch of geisha robots. And the government's real upset about that. So they send in the major and her team to get him back, and
Action scene ensues.
action scene ensues, and then political intrigue happens.
Oh god.
We find out we
There's a
find
lot.
out that
There was
the
so much political intrigue in this episode.
the Minister of Foreign Affairs, when he gets drunk, likes to swap bodies with the geishas,
Yep.
and
Because the geishas don't have a consciousness. They are just robots. They are just service bots.
Oh,
so,
really?
Like, right. Because so he can just like transfer his consciousness into
Yeah.
its empty brain case, basically, and then run it back when he's done.
oh,
We
that's
see a
neat.
lot of people communicating over wire, basically, like they
Mhm.
just think thoughts, and then the people hear the thoughts in their heads.
Mhm.
So that's always interesting. It saves them having to do mouth flap. So
Yeah.
That's true. It does do that.
We find out the reason that the military was involved is because they had someone checking into the minister. The routine check on a government official doesn't seem like a thing that's routine to me, but okay, I guess. Anyways, he was interested in a document, and they were like, well, it's not weird that he'd be interested in this document, but it's kind of weird that he's interested in this document. So they do some investigating and find out that actually the minister's his mind has been swapped with someone else's mind, so it's someone else's mind in his body. So they arrest him and don't let him take the document to America, where presumably he'd give it to WikiLeaks and then spend the next 12 years in the Brazilian embassy. How many?
Ecuadorian embassy, but
Ecuadorian,
yes.
Wow, way to make me like the villain of the show.
Well, what's interesting too is they mention defection, and so if he was going to defect to the U.S., that's an interesting little bit where apparently Japan and the U.S. are. I don't know if they're necessarily enemies. I don't know enough about this world state, but technically it's possible to defect to
They're
an ally.
nominal allies, but they have a sort of it's not a combative relationship, but they're competitive.
That also was kind of weird because he was not talking about what had happened necessarily. He was talking about what the media would be covering.
Good
Because
point,
I still was under the impression that it wasn't the minister defecting, that it was someone else in his body.
That's what it was. Yeah, there was the guy that went in after him into the bathroom. When the minister goes in there to swap with the geisha, there's a guy that follows him in afterward. That guy was, and I believe I understand this correctly, that guy was a North American agent, and he swapped bodies with the minister and then killed the minister, but it looked like he died. Then he swapped out their brain cases, and then he gets the documents or whatever. I have the documents, and then he goes and he gets right, like he goes and tries to defect, but they arrest the minister. But my understanding of the way that this all occurs is that they didn't out him as a snatched body, as a snatched shell,
Yeah.
because that would be worse than just the minister is defecting.
Mhm.
So they basically allowed it to be the minister is defecting, because this is spycraft and you don't out what actually happens. You out the story that you want the public to believe.
Yeah,
So-
that lines up pretty closely with my interpretation of events as well.
I seem to recall too that the person that they suspected of making the swap wasn't actually like North American government, but like some sort of corporation or something like that. It was like North American.
Yeah.
nanotech or I forget
Okay.
what it was.
Yeah, that makes sense. It was espionage on some level, but you're right. I'm not actually sure he was North American.
Well, they kept talking about the minister was hanging out with representatives from, it was an American company. I don't remember the name of it.
Oh yeah,
now.
you're right. Mm-hmm.
And they kept talking about NIPA.
The way that North America is talked about throughout the show is almost like North America. First of all, it seems almost as though the United States and Canada have kind of been subsumed by Mexico, perhaps as well. I'm not really sure. Have kind of been subsumed by this weird corporatocracy that
Just like real life.
yeah, right. They've kind of the government is less important than corporations. Like when you're dealing with North America, at least by my memory of the show, like they're generally, when they're dealing with North America, they're generally dealing with corporate agents and not necessarily government ones. So it's kind of an interesting, like, it's a very interesting world.
All right, Dean.
Apparently, there's an American empire in this world that was basically, it's not exactly, but basically the Confederate States, and then the rest of continental U.S. is a couple of other countries.
So
the
what's
United
so
States.
How is that different from the real world?
Right. And then there's actually the United States of America, which actually doesn't include the old capital. And then there's the Russo-American Alliance.
Yes, that's right, the Russo-American Alliance. What universe is this?
Well, that's one of the interesting things, is that this was originally like I don't know how much of that world building is unique to SAC, or
is this
if
Cold
there's
War era, Dino. I never caught on. Is this did Ghost in the Shell originally come from the Cold War era?
I think it
was the original manga was oh shit, now I can't remember. I think it was the early 90s. I'm not sure.
Okay, all right. So maybe just post Cold War. I don't know the Japanese psyche's like feelings on the Cold War even, so I don't know if that's relevant. But this
my understanding,
they were allies of the U.S.
Yeah. Oh, well, and then they, I mean, being right next to Russia and China must have been really horrifying for them.
Nice, and they were also like totally dependent on U.S. Infusions of capital, because the U.S. was like, yeah, we know we kind of wrecked your shit.
Yeah.
Our bad. Let's spend a whole lot of money making sure that you can like rebuild your economy.
Apparently the original manga was 89.
Yeah,
89. So yeah.
Maybe it is reminiscent. Maybe it has some sort of Cold War reminiscences in it, because it does really feel that way. It feels very James Bond esque. You know, it feels very super spy, international super
That's
spy.
why I love it.
Yeah. I totally get it. I guess I just never picked up on that in the original series. I never picked up on it till right now when you talk about the Russo-American Alliance.
I like that it's super spies in the coolest cyberpunk world.
I know.
This world is incredible.
I love it.
It does have a very, very cool setting. Did we finish the synopsis?
Yeah,
we did basically.
Good enough.
That's pretty much the first episode. And then we get like, basically it's like the adventure will continue. That's the kind of ending, the game is on type ending is the ending that we get. But there's what's interesting about this show too is that the episodes, there are a few bottle episodes, but most of the seasons are a whole arc where they're like tracking a specific person, or they're investigating a specific terrorist or a specific hacker, or what have you. So like this is kind of like an introductory episode that builds the world, and then like Standalone Complex and Standalone Complex Second Gig are both have like overarching stories about tracking down this one bad actor that is it's incredible, like pseudo sort of spycraft plus copcraft plus like it's just really cool arcs that are the Second Gig arc is my favorite arc. It's they're tracking down this hacker who ends up being, I think, like a kid who's like a
Hmm.
a weird super genius kid. I don't know. Red Bull's attacking me back. I love this show. I love it.
I wanted to ask Dean, when was the last time that you saw this show?
I watched all of Ghost in the Shell. I binged it for what was probably the second time about 3-4 years ago. So it's been a minute.
Having seen a lot of anime since then, do you think this held up?
It holds up for me, but we've talked before about older shows that we love. This is one of the things that I kind of wanted to get into with the idea of classics, is like people still love Gundam Wing because it's what was on Toonami. It's the Gundam we got. It is objectively one of the worst Gundam series. Like, it's terrible. But people love it because it's the one that they had when they were kids, and they became attached to it. So it's kind of a classic, even though it's garbage. This show, I don't think it's garbage. I don't think it's not bad, especially considering like when it came out. It's definitely more engaging to me as an action show than like Dragon Ball Z. It's more up my alley as far as aesthetic and like the cyberpunk world and stuff. I think if I were to try and think about it objectively, there are problems, but they're not
egregious
show killing problems.
Yeah,
that's
actually kind of my take on it too, is going into this and not having seen it before and it carrying the Ghost in the Shell name. It didn't quite live up to my expectations, but it wasn't bad. It was just like, and most of the problems I have with it are actually in production. Like the opening sequence of this is all CG, but it's 2002 CG, and it's abysmal.
And
then
for what it's worth, like 2003 also is when we got the first Lord of the Rings, which of course had a much bigger budget, and they were actually very forward with their tech at the time. So like the CG from Lord of the Rings, if you go back and like I watched it in theaters when they had the Blu-ray release about to happen. So like it had been a number of years, and like seeing it especially in theaters big on the big screen, it does show its age, but it definitely was like a better quality 3D animation than was this.
Well, for its time, 2002, for me, like if you're gonna look at something that's around 02, for me it's like, does this look better or worse than Initial D? And I think this looks way better than Initial D season 1. Like not the OP. The OP is a weird choice to go CG with it. And the re-release of the Ghost in the Shell movie with the CG shit was a bad choice. I don't watch that version. Ghost in the Shell 2.0's garbage. Don't watch it. Watch the original hand-animated.
The Scarlett Johansson version on Netflix instead.
Yeah, that's the definitive edition right there.
Yeah, right. But yeah, it's to me like it's better than Initial D. I think it's good TV show CG for its time. Yeah. So I'm totally willing to give it a pass on that. It was a weird choice to do the OP totally CG, but outside of that, like the CG elements in the show, I think mesh really well, especially as the show ages. The Tachikoma actually look really good in the world, especially in the second season. And we don't get much of the Tachikoma in this episode. We get like a moment with one.
I was gonna say, what are the Tachikoma? I don't even remember.
Are those like the little bug-like
robots?
Yeah, the crab spider robot.
Yeah.
Did you guys see the outro, like, final shot with all of them in it? Because that was a thing that happened to my eyeballs.
The final shot with the Tachikoma?
Yeah.
They do that throughout the show. They'll do a little at the very end. They'll do a little vignette with the Tachikoma because they end up being like pets. Like as the show moves on, they end up developing like personalities. So like, and there's one of them. What's up, Bert?
I was gonna say, what is their significance to the overall show? Because they, like, from what they have AI, right? Like, is that their significance?
They have a rudimentary AI, but there's a whole episode, I believe it's in Second Gig, that's about the Tachikoma developing personalities.
That's
And,
what I was gonna
like-
say. Like, because this show's a lot about consciousness. So, like, what is it? Do they develop consciousness? Is that what happens?
There's a whole episode that basically outlines the Tachikoma going from like a service bot type, very rudimentary AI,
to a conscious being.
basically thinking itself into consciousness. It's a fascinating episode, man. And it makes you love the Tachikoma because they're so sweet. Like they're a robot that develops consciousness and then they're like, I'm just a good little boy. Like,
Oh man.
Which is interesting
They're
because
wonderful.
like the OP would suggest that like the crux of the show is basically these things. Like we're fighting them constantly.
the Tachikoma are they are basically multi-purpose service droids for the police. So like you can like ride on their back. They're you remember the crab creature from the Ghost in the Shell movie?
Vaguely, it's been a very long time since I
At the
watched it.
very end,
Yeah.
the robot. Okay, it's basically that, but they just took that as inspiration and they were like, so our police force uses these bots to, and like you can ride in the back of it. Like it's like a multi-purpose sort of utility vehicle for the cops. And they're just so cool looking. I just love them. But the show itself, you talked about expectations. The thing about this show that I think is very interesting is if you've seen Ghost in the Shell the movie, it's very philosophical. It's a little slow. It's a movie that is very self-serious, and it's a good thing because it's a very serious film. Like it's a movie that is asking very real questions about consciousness and memory, and in some instances, like the film even delves into questions about sexuality and like all these other very important human things. Using the idea of the shell, like if you're a ghost, which is what they call a consciousness, if you're a ghost in a shell, what are you? And that's the whole point. This show takes that universe and says, okay, let's strip away some of the philosophy. There are episodes where it's very much still there, and the entire Second Gig arc asks a lot of those questions.
I was gonna say it's very what's the opposite of overt? It's very subtly philosophical the whole time. Yeah, the whole time.
It is. And they were like, okay, so let's strip some of that out. Let's not be so upfront with it. Let's cram in some action and have this be a cop show that asks some interesting questions every now and then, and not an interesting questions movie that sometimes has action. Like they just kind of flipped the formula of the Ghost in the Shell film, the original movie.
Yeah,
And
it's interesting that you put it that way because when I was watching this, like I said, it's been a very long time since I watched the film, but I remember the film being very like kind of deep and philosophical and, you know, slow in the sense that like definitely sort of had a very deliberate pacing. I remember like there were several.
Deliberate is what you call slow when you like it.
Because I did. I thought it was good. And like I remember too, like there was like they would take breaks periodically, like at the beginning of the film, and then like partway through the film, they would have like just like a bunch of shots of the city in the
Just
rain or something.
beautiful fucking city.
Yeah, they were definitely very beautiful, and
with the background music that's like choral and like, oh man, it's so good.
Yeah. And so it kind of like it sort of like puts you in a mood, right? That I think that's what they were going for.
So I was going to ask that, Dino. Oh, I'm sorry. When you finish, I don't want to lose my thought. I'm going to write it down.
Sure. And so yeah, I was just going to say though that like because of that, the personality of the Major was actually kind of jarring to me, to the point where I actually looked up, is this actually a different character? I went and looked up the film and I looked up the series, and it's like, okay, so it is the same person, it's the same name. I was wondering if it's actually like two different characters kind of in the same universe. Because like the Major in here, in standalone complex like felt like I don't know, a little bit more sassy.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
She's a little sassy, and she's a more kind of a straightforward cop sort
Mhm.
of character.
And that's just not the vibe that I remembered at all.
Mhm.
And part of it too is that like I think in the first one she's like at some point or another kind of like on the run. So like I didn't see her as like part of the establishment, which she definitely is here. Um, so yeah, like I said, it just like felt so jarring to me. And I think part of it too, like there's an aesthetic disconnect in the sense that like, you know, you look at the like the color palette and stuff like that. In the first one it was definitely a lot more like black with lights, and this one
Mhm.
was more like
This one was more
um
colorful. This one was more saturated too, I
yeah,
felt.
it was
Um,
saturated, like lots of different colors and stuff like that. Like they had
mhm.
like lots of shots with purples and with oranges and with greens. I'm trying to like I was trying to think of what else it reminded me of. It's probably just like a lot of other stuff around the 2000s. I think it's definitely
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
product of its time.
it very much is.
Um, so it felt different in that way. And then I was also watching the English dub on Adult Swim's website, and that dub is not amazing.
Not
And
a
so,
great dub. It is
uh,
not a great dub. It's very much a dub of its time too.
yeah.
Like you can get away with the dub, and especially when I binged this for like I think it was the second time I'd seen it. So I had seen the subs before. And when I binged this the second time, I watched the dubs because I was like, okay, I can't dedicate all my time to just
Mhm.
reading. Like I have to be able to do other things at the same time.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I did watch the dub. You can get away with it, but it's not great. You
Mhm.
definitely want to watch the subs at some point.
Yeah. So I think just like kind of the all around effect with all of those different factors compounding, it felt like a very very different show.
Mhm. I
It is very
agree. I
different.
There's
wasn't
a
I wasn't quite as jarred by the major's personality as you were, but I definitely noticed that it felt different.
It's like taking a if you watch there's a Netflix series, there's two of them actually. There's the toys that made us and the movies that made us. Um if you watch some of those, they talk about bringing things from one medium to another, and like the changes that you have to make something work in another medium.
Mhm.
And it's very clear the choices that they made to bring Ghost in the Shell, like the world and sort of the characters of the movie, into a television series. Like they introduced and fleshed out the Tachikomos so that you would have like little sort of comic relief characters. They gave the Major a bit more. It's a personality that can carry 2 seasons worth of anime.
Mhm.
Where in the show she's very dour and she's kind of
or in the
always
movie, you mean.
questioning her humanity and stuff. In this one,
Mhm.
she's a little more self confident and a little bit more straightforward. It's very clear the choices that they made to translate Ghost in the Shell to a television series. Especially one that could play for more audiences, frankly, because Ghost in the Shell is not a movie that a 12-year-old kid is gonna like, but this
Mhm.
series is it's definitely, I mean, you could probably enjoy this series from 10 years old on,
Mhm.
because it, and especially as the series goes on, because like I said, it does reintroduce those philosophical questions. It just does it more piecemeal throughout the thing rather than just being a piece about philosophy. It introduces those things over time. Bird, I think Bird had a question related to that.
I actually had a question about the music.
Mhm.
If you because I
Mhm.
find the music to be very fascinating.
Mhm.
Dino, this is your show, so I kind of, as you were talking, was doing a little bit of background research on the music and the idea behind it. What do you get out of the music? Specifically the choir parts. Like, what do you get out of it? What
Oh,
does
it's
it
so
do for
good.
you
The
in relation to the show?
Oh, it's so good, man. I think it's mostly atmospheric.
Mhm.
What's interesting about the musical choices that they made for this show, and it does again, it sort of starts to harken back to the movie more as
Mhm.
the show goes on. Um, but the my one of the more interesting choices I think they made in this was Inner Universe as the OP, because when they chose Inner Universe, I don't know what they were thinking, but like doing it in Russian is, it's a Russian song, and it's I didn't realize that until the second time I watched the show. The first time I watched through the show, I didn't hear that as Russian because I heard it as another anime OP. because I hadn't watched a lot of anime. But to go with a Russian song and like with the lyrics that it has, the lyrics are all about like internal, struggling, things like that.
Oh, apparently it's a mix of things. It's actually
yeah, I was gonna.
It's Russian, English, and Latin.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's I know there's Russian and English. I didn't pick up on Latin.
So
but,
there's
yeah, that makes sense.
There's a weird association I have with Ghost in the Shell, which is to Akira, because I watched those two movies basically at the same time, and they have
two classic anime films. That's probably a really good double feature actually, but they're both pretty heavy.
Both cyberpunk.
But they both have that choral kind of music feel to them. Even though Akira was 7 years before the Ghost in the Shell movie. So yeah, every time I hear that style music, it makes me think of that.
The interesting thing about the musical choices that are used here is that it does, like I said, it harkens back to the movie more later, but it also doesn't do that so much because the choral soundtrack of the film being very upfront and very much like there's those just long shots of these beautiful matte paintings of the city, and you get that I'm terrible, but it's very slow, and it really informs the atmosphere. They use it to good effect throughout a Standalone Complex, but they don't do it as much because this is an action show, and the thoughtful moments are supposed to be few and far between. Whereas the actual movie carries through those thoughtful moments a lot more. So they did do a little bit more of an upbeat soundtrack for Standalone Complex than for thing, but I like the music, and what I like about it too is that it's interesting that you mention it because you don't hear it as much. It doesn't stand out as a soundtrack.
It doesn't stand out as much in the series.
Right, but in the movie it's supposed to be very upfront because it's part of the experience of the film. I like the way they did it in the show in that the soundtrack sort of just kind of sits and it doesn't really register that it's playing as much, but it's still there and it still informs the tone, which is what a soundtrack is supposed to do. It just doesn't yell at you and say, "I'm music, I'm playing," the way it does in the movie, which it's just an interest. I think that's another choice that you make when you're taking a very deliberately paced film and translating it to a series. I think that's one of the choices you have to make.
So if I may, from what one Reddit poster says, and I seem to believe him because he has the most upvotes and it's a very well researched post. The folk collective group, I'm going to say Gino Yamashiragumi, but I'm not 100%
Sounds
sure.
close.
I don't know. I'm not sure if it's Gino, but it definitely is Yamashiragumi. So if anyone wants to look it up, they are a folk collective, a Japanese folk collective they were commissioned to create the soundtrack for Akira. And they used Bulgarian folk singing, and they reconstructed ancient Japanese language in order to create the theme song for Akira, including the parts where there's the choral folk singing. The purpose was something which would sound similar enough to the home audience that they would go, these people are clearly Japanese in some sense, like they're Japanese in some sense, but the Bulgarian was put in to make it sound like it didn't have a geographical location at all. Okay. So it might have just been...
Who cares about Bulgaria, am I right?
In Akira, they did it, I guess, to sort of create like what a future Japanese society would have music that sounded like, and then you can clearly see how that comes into Ghost in the Shell. So Ghost in the Shell's music might just be a straight up just an homage to Akira, which would not be surprising at all.
No, it wouldn't be, and it does inform the atmosphere in much the same way as well. This show did
Akira start that genre? Did Akira start the cyberpunk genre in Japan? I mean, put it on its back at the very least. So I don't know if it started it, but
It
I don't
it
huge.
I don't know if it started it. There's definitely things like Astro Boy and stuff like that could be
almost cyberpunky, but not
sort of the
quite.
roots of that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
aren't.
But what I meant to ask was if I was a Japanese creator and I wanted to do cyberpunk, undoubtedly the first thing I'm going to is Akira. And probably 7 years after it came out, that was 7 years after it came out, the Ghost in the Shell movie came out.
Yeah.
That's way long enough for it to have cemented itself as like, oh, this is the thing. So maybe, I don't know, I didn't know that, but actually thinking about that kind of ties the show into a larger thing, you know?
It does. It's interesting what they. I think Akira. It's interesting that you asked that. I don't necessarily think it was the start of cyberpunk. It might have been the first sort of explosive
that's
foray into dystopic Neo Tokyo sort of stuff.
Oh, what about Fist of the North Star is a dystopian? You know what? And that's really old. Actually, now that I think about it, Fist of the North Star is probably also kind of oddly dystopic cyberpunk.
It is a little bit. We had a Fist show in a recent season that was really hard to watch.
Really?
Yeah.
It was not.
What was it?
good.
Fist of the Blue Star, I think. Was
Fist
the
of the
Blue Sky.
Blue Sky. Yeah.
Oh, is that like one of the spin-offs of Fist of the North Star?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was like a prequel, maybe.
Fist of the North Star is like the best. It's one of the best.
It's Fist of the Blue Sky. I think you're right. It was a boy. It was hard to watch.
Speaking of the soundtrack, reminder that Deadmau5 has a remix of Not Exactly with the Ghost in the Shell theme.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's real good. There are a lot of remixes of Not Exactly for just like different movies and things. Ghost in the Shell is the one I care about.
Yeah.
I kind of had a question for had you guys, how many of you had seen, I'm picking up that none of you had seen Standalone Complex before.
No, I hadn't. Nope. I've seen the original movie, but I hadn't seen any of Standalone.
Okay, Chris had seen the movie, and had you seen the movie, Bird?
No. Vaguely, maybe. I'm gonna just say no. I can't really remember.
So this is like your first Ghost in the Shell thing. That's very interesting because
I remember all of the hits from the Ghost in the Shell movie. So oh, yes, you know what? I have seen it. Do you know where I don't even know if this will resonate with any of you because I don't know if this is just an East Coast thing. But do you know where I first got the Ghost in the Shell movie? Blockbuster.
No. Oh God, yes.
Blockbuster.
No, that was national. That was a national chain.
Actually, Blockbuster is headquartered in McKinney, Texas, which is like just.
Oh, is it really?
Was it really?
Oh wait, isn't that Blockbuster still open?
I don't know.
I think the one that still opens in like Ohio, like it's in the middle of the Midwest.
Yeah, there's one that's still open and it's completely different and it's really cool the way they do it now. It's kind of like a vinyl shop now, like the way they handle their business. It's much cooler. Anyway, yeah, that was my first reminiscence of Ghost in the Shell. I definitely rented it from Blockbuster.
How old would you have been when you did that?
Exactly. That's why I remember it. I could have been 10. I could have been 10
right. Like, there's no way. Do you remember liking it at 10?
It could have easily been at least 13 years ago, and I don't remember anything. So I guess I don't know whether or not I liked it. I remember the anime that impressed me the most when I was that age was Trigun. And I have no idea why, but Trigun is very good. I haven't seen it since then. But yeah, there was a brief Toonami period for me.
Yep.
And I definitely picked up Ghost in the Shell at the time.
Okay, that's cool.
Dean.
So like,
I was gonna ask if you wanted to talk about the rest of the Ghost in the Shell series. Now we've already been talking about this for like 40 minutes. So
yeah, you're right. I will just say it does. The way that they handle the series is very interesting. They sort of started out, and we saw this in this first episode. They sort of started out with like, okay, here's our world, and this is an action show. They really want you to understand that. They also establish, it's a very smart pilot. They also establish the brain cases. They establish the way consciousness works in this world. They establish communication. They establish some of the technology, the idea that you can just hook up to the person next to you and communicate privately. They establish like very interesting things about this world, and they do it all at once, and they do it very effectively. They establish pretty much everything you need to know about the world of Standalone Complex in this episode, and it's really, really good. As the show continues, they do start to, it's more piecemeal, but they do start to bring in those philosophical questions about what makes you a person if you're a ghost in a shell. That's the thing that they bring back the idea that the Major is the only full synthetic on the team. They bring back the idea that the kid, he's a younger detective, that he's got no cybernetic parts, and does that make him more pure, in air quotes? Like they bring that stuff in, but they do it piecemeal throughout the show because it's an action show. That's how you turn Ghost in the Shell into a series. Is no one's gonna sit through 26 episodes, I think is the running limit. No one's gonna sit through 26 episodes of nice matte paintings and no one's gonna do that.
I don't know, I might.
So
I'm gonna flat out say I will not.
I wouldn't. I mean, a movie of it is fine. I can't watch 26 episodes of that. No, that's far too much. So and they also introduce interesting arcs too. Like each season is an arc, and they have a couple of bottle episodes per season, but the arc continues to sort of pull the show along. Especially the second gig arc is, I was one of those deaf mutes. It's so fucking good. So if you like the kind of cyberpunk aspects of it, if you thought Ghost in the Shell the movie was boring, but you liked the world, if you know, there's all kinds of different viewpoints that can be served by this show. I think it deserves to be in discussion about classics because, number one, it's classic in my heart, and also because I really do think it informed a lot going forward. Ghost in the Shell is very influential, and Standalone Complex is just as influential as the movie. And they tried to make a first-person shooter out of it, and I was in the beta, and then they shut it down because it was too expensive. So that happened, and boy, am I sad about that. And the title was Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex First Assault Online. So maybe the title was where they put most of their money.
Get sack foul.
Get sack foul, exactly. The show's great. Give it a watch if you're interested in like cyberpunk and like cop shows, and there's more political intrigue and investigations, and it's good. It's good if you like that.
All right, then let's get into ratings for this show. Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex Episode 1. 2FA's a bitch when you can swap bodies at will.
Was that how you're supposed to deliver your title? Oh boy. All right, I gotta practice mine. Dean, you gave me mine as you were speaking, Dean.
Did the premise interest me? Yeah, I fucking love the world of Ghost in the Shell. Did the production impress me? No. We touched on that a little bit in our discussion earlier. The intro CG is bad. Luckily, they don't keep that up. That can be forgiven. But throughout the entire thing, the animation was choppy. And it looked like low frame rate even for anime.
Yeah, it is. It gets better. It gets better when they get more money. It gets better. I promise you, it gets better.
Yeah.
So overall, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't impressive. Did the storytelling impress me? Yeah. Dean kept talking about how this is an action show, but there actually wasn't a whole lot of action in the first episode, and it still kept me interested the entire time. The political intrigue was good. Dean mentioned how good a job they did world building. The storytelling did impress me. Did I enjoy the first episode? Yes. But did it make me interested to see more? Actually not really on its own. I would probably watch more of this because I like the world of Ghost in the Shell. But the first episode itself, and actually at the very beginning, title card, it says a standalone episode. and it really is. It tells a complete story, so I'm gonna say no. So this only gets a 3 for me.
So not giving you a cliffhanger like made you be like, okay, I'm done.
Mhm.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, that was definitely part of it. Chris, what are your ratings for this show?
All right, Ghost in the Shell standalone complex episode 1. Is it geisha if I swap brains with a woman? I apologize for that one.
That was really good.
Did the premise interest me? I'll say yeah, just because I'm down with cyberpunk. I don't consume enough of it to like kind of. I know. So I've followed people on Twitter from like say the tabletop RPG community when I was more involved with that who like really love cyberpunk fiction, and then like they would talk all the time about like so here's like good cyberpunk, and then here's kind of just like the generic cyberpunk that's like playing with these old tired ideas and stuff like that. So I don't know if they would like this necessarily. But I'm not that inundated with it that like I'm tired of the premise. Did the production impress me? It did not, for a lot of the same reasons that Ryan mentioned. It just kind of felt janky and of its time, which at its time maybe is really good. But I'm looking at it from someone who was used to 2020 anime.
Yeah,
So
you saw Golden Kamui. You know how good CG can look.
Yep. So no, it did not impress me. Did the storytelling impress me? It was solid. I'm not sure if impress is the right word. It did its job and it had some good intrigue and stuff like that. But it didn't really blow me away with it. And actually at some points I was kind of I don't know why. I just like I was sitting through it and it's kind of like, okay, I'm kind of done with this. Like halfway through, I just like kind of wanted to turn it off, but I kept going because we were doing it for the show. For some reason it just didn't really grab
Wow,
me.
being that turned off by it is surprising.
Did I enjoy the first episode? I think like for what I just said, like I kind of have to say no.
If in the middle of it you're like, I want to turn this off,
Yeah.
you didn't enjoy it.
It's like I appreciated it on some level, but like I think too part of it might have been like maybe nostalgic bias from having seen the film, but because I had such a disconnect with it, it just really didn't grab me. I think that if I was to keep watching this, it would be like I'd have to go back and like consume everything of the franchise that I really loved and then wanted more of it, and it's like, okay, cool, time to watch Standalone Complex now.
Chris, how long has it been since you watched the movie?
If I had to put a date on it, I want to say it was
We talking within a few years?
2010, probably.
Oh wow.
So it's been a little while now, yeah.
All right.
Because I remember it was when I was in college, when I was like first starting to get back into anime. And at the time, like my only real source of anime was Netflix, and so it's like, hey, this is on Netflix, and I've heard it's a classic, so I watched it. So
And it sticks in your mind. It's a movie that I could probably still
Not in
synopsize
mine.
like yeah, right. We're 10 years old. I could probably still synopsize the Ghost in the Shell movie just from memory. Like it really sticks. If you enjoy it, it really sticks in your mind.
I remember more like the sense that I got from it than I remember specifics. If I was to start watching it again, I'd probably be like, oh yeah, no, it's all coming back to me. But
yeah. It's a very tonal movie, so that
Mhm.
makes sense. Like atmosphere is a massive chunk of the pie of that movie.
And so did the first episode make me interested to see more? Not really, no. I can see the appeal in it. And Ryan, mentioned the fact that we kind of got like this complete thing. It's like, cool. I feel satisfied with what that was, and I don't feel like I need more. It's kind of it's a risk in some ways, like having like a nice like full story in the first episode is a good way to like kind of have a satisfying episode and to kind of establish everything that you need to, and to not make it feel like there's some sort of like cheap cliffhanger to keep you going. But if that doesn't compel people forward, then it can also be kind of a double-edged sword. So I believe that is just a 1 overall for me. I appreciated it, and I'm sure it's a great show overall. It's just that for some reason this first episode didn't grab me.
Dean?
You know what I'm gonna give this, man. This is a 5 for me, man. The cyberpunk thing is great. I think one of the reasons I thought about this while we were talking. I watched Standalone Complex before I watched the movie.
Oh, really?
I was younger when
Whoa.
I watched Standalone Complex.
Hmm.
So for the first time. So
It's gotta give you a very different opinion than.
Mhm.
it
than
was
the other-
interesting because I also read about Ghost in the Shell before. Like, I remembered watching Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, at least the first season or whatever, when I was a kid. But I read about Ghost in the Shell before I went back and watched the movie, so I knew already that it's like, well, Standalone Complex is totally very different from the film because it's a series and it's more of an action investigation show, whereas the movie is very much a meditation on existence. So like I knew what I was in for when I flipped and was like, okay, I'll watch the movie now. I knew it was going to be a slower sort of meditation that takes place in this world, but is asking more questions than showing you gunfights. And so I wasn't surprised by either tone, and I appreciated both sort of equally. There's more films actually. There were 4 OVAs made, the Ghost in the Shell Arise series, that were made and come out on Netflix. That take place in the Standalone Complex universe, but they're prequels. They're very interesting movies. It's weird seeing recent animation telling a prequel to Ghost in the Shell. But the what was I saying? Oh yeah, okay. So scenario interest, yes. Production, look, I think it's great for 2002. I really do think it's great for 2002.
I
think
thought this. I straight up thought this was from 2012, dude. I didn't even
Really?
realize that. I had no
I
idea
thought it
this
looked
was all the way
really
back
good for 2002.
Wow,
It
I gotta
was-
change one of my answers then. That actually changes it.
Yeah, I thought it was really good for 2002. It again looks way better than initial D season 1. Like I still think that if you know it's almost 10 years old, it's 12 years old. If 20, fuck me. If you know it's
18.
almost 20 years old,
Yep.
then it I think it holds up all the more when you're watching it, like the animation itself and stuff like that. But that's just me personally, and I already love the thing, so I'm not objective. The storytelling, I love the world building in this episode. They hit all the things they need to hit to set you up to understand the world going forward. They do it in an interesting little investigative. It's a 23-minute investigation basically. That's you can track, and it's cool. And it's like he swapped bodies with this guy and this guy swapped, and it sets you up for the crazy shit to come in Standalone Complex, because it gets crazier than this later on. And then I enjoy it, and I'm interested to see more. I'm probably gonna binge this motherfucker again because I love the hell out of it. Like,
Bird, what are your ratings?
For Ghost in the Shell, SAC, which I'm gonna call "What Makes a Ghost into a Man," or "How I Learned to Love Two Specific Frames," and I'll tell you. Why.
Oh shit! I forgot my title. My title was "Robot Sex Geishas Win."
There you go. The premise. I'm still having trouble figuring out what the premise was, so I have to just on that say I did not enjoy the premise. It did not interest me. I actually enjoyed it. It didn't interest me. I Dean explaining it is going to make me have to go back and watch it again and see if I could pick up on more of the themes. Did the production impress me? The answer was no, but it is yes. I'm changing it to yes, knowing the time that this was created in. And the reason why I love Two Specific Frames is I said it before and I'll say it again. The gore was great. It was a great little moment, and it's unfortunate that happens in the first scene, because everything after that I was kind of looking for more of that, and it ended up just being shooting geishas in the head, which was cool. That was a cool scene too. The
geisha head,
awesome.
like the geisha's head, the top of her head was gone and her lower jaw was still there. Oh, it's so cool.
It was cool in retrospect. It was cool. Did the storytelling impress me? Again, this is one where Dean kind of has persuaded me more than the show did, so I'm going to say no. But I will finish this with: did you enjoy watching the episode? I did not, because I was having trouble following through with it. And are you interested to see more? The answer was no, but it is yes. I need to see more now, because the playing with consciousness is something I did not pick up initially, and then as we started talking, I started going, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." Ghost in the Shell, let's go, which just shows that I didn't remember the movie at all.
Well, and it's
and
also
so-
like an actual philosophical term too. That's where they took the title from.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 5, but I would definitely watch more, and I can imagine that changing depending on how the show progresses, especially if they get more money. So 2 out of 5, Ghost in the Shell.
That brings our total score to 11, or 55%. The next show we have to talk about is Cowboy Bebop. Chris, will you tell us about this show?
Yeah. So Cowboy Bebop, we open with a scene that is implicitly. So actually, there's a line that I like. So I've seen this first episode a couple times, but never actually seen the series, so it's funny. But there's a line later on that raises a question about this, which I'll get into a little bit later. But when I first saw this, at least, it's implied that this is kind of the end of the story, and then we're sort of going to go back to the beginning and see how we got there. Where we see this bouquet of roses, and or maybe just a rose, and it's been dropped into a puddle, and everything is like very like desaturated, and it's raining, and our protagonist pulls out a gun and starts shooting at some peoples, and they're shooting back, and it's implied that he is gunned down there, and that's probably his demise.
That comes back around, I believe, in episode 11.
Well, there you go. And so then we cut to what I believe to be the past, which is going to be our present for the time being in the story. And so they're in a spaceship, and he is training martial arts. He's kind of like doing some like, form exercises and stuff like that, while his partner on the ship is making special beef with the green peppers. Turns out that the special beef means that there is no beef. And he brings that up. And I've noticed in at least one other show that I can recall recently. I think it was I'm trying to blank on the name, but the one with like the little cat mech, and like going into the mind space. He was motivated by the promise of meat, and so I think that the lack of meat, and this is true historically too, the lack of meat kind of implies a level of poverty. So we get the sense that these guys are not very well to do.
What's the socioeconomic condition of these bounty hunters?
Poor. And so he's like, so why is there no beef? And the dude's like, because we have no money. It's like, well, what happened to like, the million cred that we got for that last bounty job?
Can I just interrupt and say this scene, I was cracking up the entire time. It's
a pretty good scene.
When he's like stirring his chopsticks into it angrily.
And he's like, why is there no meat? What happened to the the million cred that we got for that last job? It's like, well, between like the property you destroyed and the hospital bill for the cop that you assaulted and like all these other things, the repairs for the ship, we were left with like no money. It's like, oh, well, great. So, and like it's a great little way to give us a sense of like why they're at where they're at, what their condition is, but also a bit of the personality of this bounty hunter, his tendencies. And so they take on a bounty that's going to take them to, was it like Tijuana? And it's not actually the city in I think Mexico, but it's actually a space station. So they use this warp lane to arrive at the space station, and they fly down. I
didn't catch the first time. I haven't, in all the times that I've watched Cowboy Bebop, which is twice. I believe I've watched the full series twice. I never caught that the space lanes were told.
It's such a good scene.
I didn't. As soon as they went through the space lane, the toll receipt comes out, and I was like, oh fuck, I never caught that in all the times that I've watched this show.
There's also the voiceover in like 3 or 4 different languages, which is like, please line up single file and proceed through the toll booth.
So yeah, they're heading down to this the station. It looks kind of like like an orbital ring sort of, or a ring sort of station where like almost
Halo?
like a Halo-esque sort of idea. I'm sure this is probably where Halo got it, or similar ideas. So clearly they're spinning it to create artificial gravity.
Yep.
And we get a scene where the mark that they're chasing down walks into a bar with a very attractive lady who appears to be pregnant.
Right.
And they sit down.
Katerina. Can never forget Katarina.
And they sit down and he asks for a Bloody Mary, which is the code for like, hey, like if you have the right responses, you're dealing in this product. And so they go into the back. The bloody eye. They go into the back and the guy like asks him to prove that it's the real deal, and so he like sprays this into his eyes get all bloodshot. And we get some like first person perspective stuff too, where like there's like you kind of get the sense that he's in like this kind of haze of like everything seems to like be moving more slowly, or like at least in flashes from our perspective. And then the bar is assaulted by this group of thugs. They start just like shooting the whole place up. The bartender actually gets killed right away. And Katarina jumps behind the bar and she's taking cover and returning fire here and there. And then our bounty boy starts just like annihilating people in hand to hand. Actually, no, it's not just hand to hand. He actually has a gun too that like they'll be shooting at him, and we kind of get these flashes of like he's just running up on them, and then they look panicked for a split second before we then get like a blood splatter. So he takes out all the thugs, and then the bar's left in a mess, and that is the state that we find it in when the cook of the I guess like Spike, who's our main character, and
Gus? Nope, not Gus.
Jet?
Yeah, Jet, yes.
Jet Black. His name is Jet Black, by the way.
So
names
Jet
in
goes.
The show are amazing. One of the best parts of the show is the names.
Spike Spiegel,
Spike
Faye
Spiegel.
Valentine, like they God, it's so good.
Yeah, Asimov, Solon San. It's great names, dude.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, do you think they named the asteroid Tijuana before or after they realized it was going to be like a scum pit? Like, did they name it? Did they go like, well, this is what the real Tijuana is going to be like, so let's just make an asteroid that's the same?
So they make a lot of references. Like at one point, I think Spike actually says like, I'm like one of your old school cowboys, like kind of like a wanderer, like that sort of thing. So they definitely are trying to give you this sort of like space Western feel. And so I think they
Very
did
much a
decide
space
beforehand that like the look of the city, once you get past the fact that it's a ring station, it looks like,
it's a
Tijuana.
scum. It's a hive of scum and villainy.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
Much like the real Tijuana.
And so yeah, I think they were trying to sort of like evoke that look and feel very specifically.
Mhm.
I was wondering in the lore of the show if they chose.
Oh, I see.
If they chose to name it Tijuana, when they chose it, were they like, oh, it's a scum pit, we'll just call it Tijuana, or were they like, well, this is the Tijuana asteroid, hopefully, we'll have like a kids park here, and
It'll be great.
it'll be nice, I promise.
Maybe they transplanted Tijuana, and that's why it's called that. Like it's sort of like,
Yes,
we'll just
picked
take
it
the
up.
city and move it into space.
Yes, yes. We have the technology.
We have the technology. You just sort of break the Earth into chunks and then spread it around the galaxy. So Jet finds the scene a mess, and he helps himself to some liquor. And then a couple of other guys come in after looking for the bloody eye. And Jet hides and then hits one of them with a bottle, and then like puts a gun up to the other one and asks him for details. So he's basically getting information about the mark and where he is and where he's going. Meanwhile, I think Jet actually has a run-in with them.
Spike,
Spike. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Spike has a run-in with them, the couple, and you can tell that our Mark is definitely on edge, but Spike kind of plays it cool and doesn't confront him at that moment. And then he sort of endears himself a little bit to Katarina. And so when the Mark guy, he finds out that he's a bounty hunter, he's about to choke him out. And then Katarina gets him to stop. And they have a little exchange about like, why did you do that? It's because he's young and attractive or whatever. So you can tell there's a little bit of tension between these two. It's almost like a little bit of a Bonnie and Clyde, sort of like fugitives on the run.
It's very much Bonnie and Clyde if Clyde's a drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
And so like apparently we were told at one point that he stole this supply of bloody eye from whatever gang it was that was distributing it. And so he's wanted by that gang and he's wanted by the law, and they want to basically sell this all off in kind of the outer planets so they can settle down on Mars, which is apparently a nice place. Go join Carol and Tuesday down there. Suddenly we have a shared universe.
Right. And the boys from Iron Blooded Orphans.
And so so our Mark goes to sell it to another guy, and Spike has disguised himself as a barkeep, wearing a poncho and a sombrero.
It's perfect. God, it looks so good.
It was pretty cool. And so they go through the whole, thing of like, asking for the Bloody Mary, and it's like, oh, I'm not sure to have any tomato juice and blah, blah, blah. And then Spike reveals himself to be what he is, and they have a fight with lots of great choreography.
Oh, it's so good. Fight choreography is so good.
At one point, I think like gunfire happens and Katarina gets hit in the belly, and then that's when you see a bunch of red eye spilling out. So it's not that she was pregnant; that's where she's stashing the stash. And so I think like the cops are coming or something like that, and so they jump into their airship, and Spike jumps into his airship or spaceship, and there's like a little bit of a chase scene, and then in order to kind of like pilot effectively and get away, he's basically overdosing himself with red eye to the point that he kind of just like loses all reason, and he's shooting up into space, and he's trying to escape, and you can see there's a blockade of police spaceships, and he just is totally insane. And so Katarina's like, well, this is it, we can't run anymore, and she sort of like looks at him and then shoots him in the head.
And then she goes, now this is pod racing.
Now this is pod racing. And then the police gun down their ship. And so we get a very cool shot of like all this like glass and debris, and her floating there with all the red eye spilling out of her belly. And then Spike is back on the ship, and they're making special beef with peppers again, and he's training. And so it's this very interesting kind of like cyclical thing they're establishing of like, well, here we are again, and like just we experienced like this kind of like horrific little story of these two people and how they met their end, and life goes on. So
Yep.
at one point too, she says adios space cowboy when she parts, because he described to her that he was like an old-fashioned cowboy, and so that's where the see a space cowboy line, I think, it comes from throughout the show. So
See a space cowboy. What a fucking great line. What a great tone. What a great show. Like
I love the aesthetic of the show so much. And the animation actually holds up pretty well, except for the first person scenes when they're
they don't look great.
No, they don't look.
Oh, I know it. I noticed. I forgot about those. They're like, not only do they not look great, they're very jarring.
I think that was the intention, though. I think we were supposed to kind of get a sense of like what you're seeing if you're on this drug, and you kind of like when I was seeing that, I kind of felt. It communicated to me, I think, what they intended to, which is that like you're in just sort of this berserk state of.
I was gonna say it's very disorienting.
Yeah,
like, especially yeah. So maybe they did their job then. Yeah.
It's so good though. They like there are aspects of this show that are you mentioned the animation on it. Megalobox, when they made Megalobox, they were like, okay, so we're making Cowboy Bebop then? Like they downsampled Megalobox, they hand animated it, they basically did everything they could to make Megalobox look like Cowboy Bebop. That's how fucking good Cowboy Bebop looks.
Yeah, I actually was really surprised how well it held up. And a lot of scenes, the fight especially, like the choreography is so good, the animation is smooth.
Very stylish.
Very stylish.
How much of the smoothness of this show is informed by, and I guess we should just get right into this aspect of it. How much of the smoothness of the show is informed by the fucking beautiful, crunchy, smooth, just soundtrack?
Oh, the soundtrack is so good.
God,
it definitely helps, but
yeah, we get like the very sort of like jazzy bebop OP. We get like the first thing we get after the OP is like this very bluesy harmonica kind of thing going on. So it definitely
God,
creates like that kind of like Western atmosphere for sure.
and it's and the like here's the thing that they do that's so fucking good is they crammed bebop and jazz and like sad lonely cowboy music into this blender, and like Yoko Kanno just fucking crushes it. Just absolutely wrecks fucking shop with the soundtrack. It is probably one of the best anime soundtracks of all time, and it is not weird for me to say that. Everyone thinks that. Like this is so fucking good. Oh, I forgot how good it was until like you remember Tank, but like the harmonica when he's making the beef and peppers and he's there practicing his whatever Tai Chi, whatever the fuck he was doing.
Oh, this show has an aesthetic, dude. It really does.
Uh,
This show
I was-
commands its look so well.
I
Spikes-
forgot to. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say Spike's whistling when he gets into a ship and goes to the planet ahead of Jet.
And they do it in such a way that it tells you that space is quiet, but they still like have the ship make noises that it wouldn't make because you're in fucking space. Like they still do that, but it's very sparse, and so they layered that whistling over it to make sure that you understand that space is silent. These other sounds are just there to like basically keep the visuals interesting. Like it's fucking amazing.
Yeah, it's very smart. It's very good.
I forgot to mention in my synopsis that the reason Spike goes ahead and they split up is because he was going to talk to like a shaman friend who's going to like give him his fortune and sort of help him to find his mark that way. And he kind of like does this like sort of like, you know, fortune telling sort of thing, and then says like you're going to find the red-eyed coyote at the, you know, blah blah blah. And at that point too, he also gives him this other omen that's like you're going to come across a woman who will like, you know, mean your death or something like that. And he says that you know, it's like, oh, I've already died because of a woman once or something like that. I forget exactly what the line was, but that was the line that I was mentioning. That it's like the very thing at the very beginning was that a flashback or a flash forward. After I heard that line the second time, I was like, oh, maybe he was referring to that. So like he's died once and now this is later. I'm not sure. My guess is still there was a flash forward.
It's what's interesting about the way that the show uses its timeline is that it basically introduces the show with like, here's this thing that you're not quite sure about. Rose and a bird and a guy gets shot. Here you go. So yeah, now we're just gonna make you fall in love with the characters. And then they spend the entire runtime of the show. They call back to that every now and then, but they spend the entire show making you fall in love with the characters. And then at the end, they're like, and now we're closing the loop and the show's over. Like the way that the arc of the show functions is a masterclass in manipulating the audience's expectations and their time as well. Because you remember when Faye Valentine shows up, you remember the old Indian man's prophecy, basically his soothsaying, and you remember like you're gonna meet a woman that means you're in, and it's like, oh shit, here's Faye Valentine. They're gonna like she's gonna get him killed, and then things don't happen that you might expect to happen, and other things happen that you had no idea were gonna happen. And God, the show's so good.
Yeah, just remembering Faye's arc. Like, there's so much I want to talk about that we can't because we're only talking about the first episode.
For the moment.
For the moment, yeah. I probably still won't bring it up because it's kind of spoilery.
Yeah, actually, I still haven't seen the series actually, which I'll get into that a little bit when we get into our ratings.
Oh, dude,
but
man, it's so fucking good.
Yeah, I hear from everyone that it's absolutely a classic, and I can see why, even just from the first episode.
My one problem with this show, if I had one, is that each episode is almost a little bit too standalone. There isn't really much of an overarching narrative. Like
right.
The stuff with
they really loop the narrative in, like it's the very beginning and the very end,
Yeah.
and that's your narrative bits, and then the rest of it are just kind of bottles, or I think there might be some 2-parters in there that are like
there's a couple 2-parters
that are like, so this is this is just the thing they're doing today.
I think that's also kind of a tradition, though, of like westerns. I've not seen a lot of old westerns, but I definitely got the impression they're very episodic, and that it's like here's just like an episode from the life and story of like this person or this group of people.
Absolutely.
I mean, even looking at like The Mandalorian now that just came out recently, it's like that's kind of applying the Western formula to Star Wars, where each episode, like there is an overarching story of like, the Mandalorian trying to protect Baby Yoda. But there's also kind of like each episode, or maybe two in some cases, is like just kind of a particular job or particular uh, episode.
It's interesting you bring up The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian is absolutely Star Wars Bebop.
Mhm.
Like it is.
That's why it is the best thing to come out of the Star Wars universe since the fucking original series.
I agree. It's so fucking good. They
Can we do an episode on that, Dino? Can we review the series? Have you reviewed it yet? Have you reviewed The Mandalorian yet?
We only do anime here.
No. Yeah, it's just anime on this show. And I haven't talked about it anywhere else, but I love it.
I will pay Disney to turn it into an anime just to...
It's so good, but it's very much Cowboy Bebop in that like and this I think speaks to how effective not just the space western genre is, because we also have things like Firefly and stuff like that that are good. But I think The Mandalorian is probably better than Firefly, personally. But
It depends what you're looking for, but yeah.
Right. You have none of these shows that are space westerns that are good space westerns try at all to hide the fact that they're a western. You have some shows that like sort of try to bury the western roots. Actually, Star Wars being one of them. It looked more like a samurai movie than a western, even though it had a lot of western stuff in it. Mandalorian, this show, Firefly, they do not hide the fact that they're westerns. The third track that we hear in Cowboy Bebop is just Jailhouse Harmonica. Like they do not hide that. And he's walking around in a poncho and a sombrero. Like this is a western through and through. He goes to talk to an old Indian man. Why is an old Indian man on like a floating ring? It doesn't make any sense, but he's there because this is a fucking western. Deal with it. Like that's very much what this show does. It's very much what The Mandalorian does, and I think that makes it better. Don't be ashamed of the fact that you're a western. Lean into it, because westerns are great. Like the tropes of the western it's a great storytelling method, and if you lean into that, it just feels deeper without even having to be deeper. It feels deeper. It's great.
Because it kind of comes with the associations you have with westerns, and whether that be like the genre of fiction or the history, just kind of like we've talked before about like tropes. We use tropes often in a negative sense, and we maybe should more often use the term cliche, because tropes can communicate. They can be just a shorthand for something that like immediately like puts someone in the space of like, okay, I know what's going on here. And like, there's the idea that no media exists in a vacuum. The viewer of something is always going to come into something with their own knowledge of other things that they've seen and the world they live in and their society and yada yada yada, to where like you can add a lot of meaning to something just by kind of like using some sort of symbol that kind of gives us an association for like, okay, and now that I've seen that symbol here, everything carries more weight immediately.
It's an interesting way to close the loop too when you have something like Cowboy Bebop, because the western is born of the samurai movie. Like that's like the western, the way that we think of the tropes of a western is born of the samurai genre. And it's interesting that the culture that brings us the samurai genre then takes the western genre, is like, okay, now we're putting it in space. It's an interesting sort of way to close the loop on that, but I think it makes, in a meta sense, it makes Cowboy Bebop all that much easier to appreciate as a show. Even if you're not into sci-fi, you're not into westerns, you're not into bounty hunter stories, you're not into kind of the off-the-wall aesthetic of the show, even if you're not into any of that, just on a meta level, culturally, it's more interesting just because of what it is and the places that it takes inspiration from. It's got so much depth to it just based on that alone.
And we've talked a little bit about like the aesthetic and how they just kind of nail it. and you have to appreciate it for that. When you think about how often we've complained about the shows that try to just jam too much, like have our list of cool things and then just sort of like jam that into something and it doesn't turn out very well. This
Magical girl
doesn't
mechas and Chippy.
like this doesn't feel like a list of good, like a list of interesting things, because we only think about the list of interesting things if it's done poorly. But when it kind of like all coalesces into like a whole, it becomes distinctive and unique and iconic. Like
It feels like
when
its
you think
own
about it,
world.
when you think about it, it's like space and spaceships, cool. Bounty hunting, cool. Westerns, cool. Martial arts, cool. Like all this different stuff. But they just nail the execution of it in a way that like it's Cowboy Bebop now. It's not a list of cool things.
Right. That's it's Cowboy Bebop is instantly recognizable. So much so that like even if you're watching something like Megalobox, I think Megalobox is a prime example for how influential Cowboy Bebop remains. Is like not only is it the visual style that kind of they crib from Cowboy Bebop, but also some of the art direction, like some of the tech looks very Cowboy Bebop. It's got smooth lines in places and it's cobbled together in others, and it's a very interesting way to build a world. And it just speaks to how incredible Cowboy Bebop is, that it still is like inserting itself into other really good shit.
Do you think Cowboy Bebop is like up there? I mean, maybe this isn't even hard to say, but as far as like the Mount Rushmore of anime TV shows, this is up there, right? It has to be.
Probably.
I think Cowboy Bebop.
This is like a genre-defining show.
It is genre-defining. I think for that reason, I would put it on the Mount Rushmore of pop culture. Like it's like pop culture generally. I think it belongs there because it is
a stretch.
That's so like for whatever this is worth.
I would love you to make an argument for, because like I can totally see there being a way to make that, certainly Japanese culture. Oh, I bet. And then I bet you global culture, this has a healthy place in global culture. It's not Star Wars, but it's there. It's there.
So for what it's worth, if you just Google classic anime, the first one that comes up is Cowboy Bebop.
No shit.
Yeah,
there you go.
I think
it's like looking at it right here.
Everybody else is Googling that.
Cowboy Bebop, Evangelion, Dragon Ball Z. What is this? Lane, Serial Experiments, Lane. Escaflown, Gurren Lagann, Code Geass, and
all right, it's starting to lose its meaning.
But
once Gurren Lagann comes in, it's starting to lose its meaning.
Yeah, I disagree with that. But
it's not classic.
I kind of consider it a classic.
I don't know. It's
really?
got the sense of like
a younger
an
classic,
instinct
but...
classic sort of.
Yeah,
I think without Cowboy Bebop, Cowboy Bebop, the TV series started in '98. Without Cowboy Bebop, we don't get Firefly. Without Cowboy Bebop, we don't get The Mandalorian. Without Cowboy Bebop, I think there's more that Cowboy Bebop has informed than, I'm not going to say any other thing, but in its genre, it's probably the most informative.
Here's the way, you know what? There's sometimes in hip hop, for example, because this happens in hip hop more than it happens in other genres because of the fact that it's usually one person, so there's an idol to look up to. In hip hop, your favorite rapper's favorite rapper is a thing, right? It's your favorite rapper's favorite rapper is not the rapper that we all know, but it's the rapper that all your favorite rappers know. And maybe Cowboy Bebop is like that. Maybe it kind of transcends the mainstream, but it informs all of the mainstream creators. Because I actually know personally, I know a few of my friends are animators. One of them works for Adult Swim, and his main influence is Cowboy Bebop. And I'm pretty sure I could rely on all of the animator friends that I have to go, hey, did you like Cowboy Bebop? Oh, of course, it's a classic. Maybe it's like that. Maybe in that way it's influential, where you wouldn't even really know until you look at The Mandalorian and you look at the way that, Mando acts, position. It's so Spike. It's so classic cowboy, solo, only concerned about getting the job done. Very classic style. And maybe I agree with you. It's definitely a defining thing, a defining piece of art.
You heard it here first. Cowboy Bebop is Tupac's favorite anime.
You know what? I bet you Tupac watched anime, and I wouldn't be surprised. When did it air? Oh, 98. Yeah,
Yep.
98. Hey, I don't know. You never know. You never know.
I really do think it has a definitive place in pop culture that I think is hard to match, man. It's hard for other things to match.
I think it's also like, and I was wondering too to what degree it was an influence on all those things you named. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but I wonder, because like I think that of all the anime out there, this is one of the few that like even non-anime watchers are likely to at least have heard of, if not necessarily have watched. But yeah, I don't know, because like I never actually saw it. Like I knew the name like for a very, very long time, even though I'd never seen it.
Yeah.
You see people who don't like even know anime walking around in Spike Spiegel shirts. Like this is a thing that is like the way that you see people walking around in Nirvana shirts. That's this like for anime.
Do we have any more we want to say about Cowboy Bebop, or do we want to just get into ratings?
I'm cool with that.
All right, Chris, and then you get to start your ratings for this show.
Cowboy Bebop episode 1, A Red-Eye Flight to Hell. Did the premise interest me? Yes. And partially that's just the name recognition of Cowboy Bebop. I, having seen the first episode before, because at one point I tried to sit down, it's like, okay, I'm going to finally watch Cowboy Bebop, and I watched the first episode. And then I haven't seen any more after that, aside from just like a few occasionally, like I'll have seen like, you know, like famous fight scenes and stuff like that that people post to YouTube. But I would say that yes, the premise interests me, just because it sounds cool and there's that name. Did the production impress me? Absolutely. It definitely still holds up. Very good detail in the world. It kind of creates this neat aesthetic. Like it definitely feels of its time, but in a good way. And I mentioned too, like the choreography and the aesthetic and everything. It's all really good. Did the storytelling impress me? Yes, it did. I think that it's a good self-contained episode. They will tell you what you need to know without it feeling like they're just dumping exposition on you. And the characters feel, you know, real and interesting, and like they're larger than life sometimes, but in, again, a good way, not in a kind of like ridiculous way. So you definitely feel endeared to them pretty quickly. Even just like the we come to understand our Mark and Katarina fairly well, and kind of like their story, even though it begins and ends, and with not even like over the course of the episode, like kind of a little bit into it and a little bit before the end. So they definitely accomplished a lot of the storytelling in a short time. I did enjoy the first episode for all those reasons. It make me interested to see more. And this is where things get interesting for me, because like I said, I've watched the first episode before. And because again, the standalone idea of like this sort of self-contained story, even watching like going to the after the credits and seeing like the next time on, and here's like the hijinks that we're going to see, for some reason maybe like that didn't interest me or whatever, but I've never really gone around to starting up the second episode. And I think the part of that might be because I felt fairly satisfied with the first one. Didn't see much promise in the little teaser they gave us, aside from like just more of the same. Yeah, I don't know. I think part of it too might be that because it's kind of considered this classic, it's not the sort of thing that I'm just going to pop on willy-nilly. I kind of want to be in the right mood to watch it, or like to dedicate enough time to watch it. So I don't know exactly what the reason is, but the first episode somehow fails to compel me forward, even though I've tried it a couple of times now. One of these days, I'm actually going to sit down and I'm going to watch Cowboy Bebop because I think I need to. But I'm going to have to answer no to that one. So that is a 4 overall for me.
I do want to say, even if you can't sit down and like dedicate time to it, this is one of the rare 90s anime where the dub is actually not bad. It's not great, but it is not bad. It is. I was
actually going to say I really like it. I actually think it works.
The voice actor selection. The voice actor selection's great. The performances are really top notch. This is the rare 90s dub that's like actually kind of a gem of dubs.
It is.
It's really good.
If I can, I was going to mention that when I go to Evangelion. If you've ever heard the English Evangelion dub that's on Netflix, I don't know who did it. Maybe probably Funimation or whoever usually does it. It's horrendous.
Netflix dubbed it themselves.
Yeah.
Netflix actually did that.
Yeah,
dub.
this is actually different.
That is atrocious.
Yeah.
They should never do that again.
It is not great.
Atrocious. No, it's atrocious. Oh.
Dean, what are your ratings?
Okay, so scenario interest. Look, space cowboys, man. I'm there. Production. This show is beautiful. This is a show that I would really have a hard time taking a point away from it anywhere. It's gorgeous. Its aesthetic is perfect, and it knows exactly what it's doing, and the music is amazing, and everything about this is so clean and polished. With maybe in the very first episode, the exception of those first-person shots, this show, not just episode 1, but the entire show, is gorgeous and amazing and beautiful. The storytelling, I'm absolutely here for. It's a very simple bottle episode, but they do give you that flash forward at the beginning, and it's a cool thing. Storytelling solid. You know your characters by the end of it, at least Jet and Spike, and you get it. You understand what you're watching. I enjoyed episode 1. I enjoy every episode of the show. I'm interested to see. Yeah, I've watched this thing several times. The thing about Cowboy Bebop that I want to point out, this show is so fucking good that it makes me personally shed a tear over a lonely satellite. That's all I'll say. But there is an arc that involves a lonely satellite, and it makes me cry.
I forgot about that.
The show. So that's it. 5. It's 5. It's perfect 5.
Did you give your title?
I did not, and that's because I don't have one for this, because I literally couldn't think of one. I think I might go with, but who would build the space lanes? Might be a good one. But that's all I've got.
All right, then for me, Cowboy Bebop episode 1, Drug Baby.
That's a good one.
Did the premise interest me? Yes. Did the production impress me? Yes. Did the storytelling impress me? Yes. Did I enjoy the first episode? Yes.
Yes.
Did it make me interested to see more?
There it is.
Man.
So neither of you really want to see this thing more, which is crazy because
it's really weird. It's really weird because we want to see
saga. You guys are looking at a real achievement of art, and I'm really surprised you don't want to see more.
It's the weirdest thing. Like, I know I definitely want to watch it, and yet, like, just after watching the first episode, I just haven't gone around to it. I think that says something about something.
I think it does. Having seen the first episode a couple of times, like you said, and never gone on with it, it says something about something. You're right.
So I have seen all of this before, and I'm trying to decide what it is that kept me going the first time, and because I do want to go back to this, what is it that makes me want to go back? Is it remembering my watching through it and kind of some of the highlights throughout the series? Was it the first episode? I feel like a lot of why I kept watching the first time was I really liked the aesthetic.
It's the cool factor. That's what kept me in the first time I watched it.
The name. So this one's right on the edge. I am going to give it a point for does the first episode make me want to see more, because I feel like the aesthetic and world building had a lot to do with it. The story, not so much, and especially now that I know that there really isn't an overarching narrative, that doesn't play a factor. But yeah, the character moments we get and the aesthetic, I think. So I will give it a 5.
There is, I think it's a 2-episode arc with a space trucker who listens to the mid 90s conception from a person who listened to metal in the 80s of metal. Like, and that's her personality. Like, that's kind of the core of it, is the fact that she listens to like 80s metal. And that's like, she's a space trucker who listens to metal, and it's like, I think a 2-episode arc in this show. She's amazing. I love her, and I wanted her to come back, and she never did.
Bird, what are your ratings?
It's a 5, man. Cowboy Bebop, the Spiegelorian gets a 5 out of 5 for me.
Nice.
The premise, not only does the premise interest me, space opera is probably like 3rd favorite genre to ever see. I love like ancient history stuff, and I love like modern, like 70s spy and cop stuff, and then spaghetti westerns in space. How could you? There's nothing better than that. The productions. So I'm going to give a point to the premise. I will give a point to the production because for 98, this is real good. It's real good. It does not hold up today, in my opinion, but it was really good for the time. So I will give it a point for that. The storytelling impressed me. I am going to give it a point for this because it impresses me enough to be able to say I want to see more, and I enjoyed watching the current episode. So it is. Would you? This is like an episodic show, right? Like I wouldn't say there's no overarching story, but it's definitely not an on the nose one.
Yeah,
it's
that's
not.
true.
It's not serialized in that way.
You have
very
to. It's
much
more like, here's how you get to know this character's life is the overarching story.
Exactly.
I wonder to what degree, and I think we've talked a little bit about this before on the show, the kind of binge culture now of like, you know, just being able to pop on Netflix or whatever, just like watch the entire season.
Yeah. Right.
Those things kind of want you to like they place a high value on pulling you forward, or at least making you not want to stop, right? Whereas if you kind of have
ends
like
on a cliffhanger that
if you have
seems like it
viewing,
should actually be in the middle of 3rd act.
Yeah, like if you have appointment viewing of like, this is the time and place that I'm going to be watching TV and this show is going to be on, then like, hell yeah, pick out what Bebop's on, let's do it. And I think in like kind of the more on-demand world, you have to like kind of be like, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to watch something. What do I want to watch right now? And for me personally, like I know I don't sit down to watch something very often. Usually if I've got some free time, I'm like playing video games or maybe pulling up something on YouTube or working on something. I'm not usually sitting down just to watch TV or a movie or whatever. So it could just be me to some extent. But I also wonder too if like so for example, like if we were to make this an anime night show, and we don't do that super regularly, so but like, you know, at one point or another, like we can actually make it through a show because like this is a show that we're watching an anime night, here's the slot for it, and we're going to watch at least one episode, if not two. And like that's kind of like my version now of appointment viewing. Whereas, you know, back in the day when you actually had a TV and this thing airs at this time, like even DVRs kind of messed with that a little bit. I think that we now make TV fit our schedules and not making our schedules around TV. And I think that that might have an effect on what sorts of storytelling tend to be more successful.
I would agree with that. It's hard to sit down and stay interested when there's all of these things that are serialized, some of which you might just be halfway through, and they're good stories. Like there's a lot of good TV right now. And then to sit down and say like, well, I'm just gonna watch a couple of bottle episodes of a show.
That is a thing that I've been thinking about, not just you know, for anime, but like one of the things that I was doing recently was binge watching The Sopranos. And I realized very quickly The Sopranos was not a show that was designed to be binge watched. And the serialization thing is very real. And the shows, like people are conditioned to do it today to watch basically 4-hour movies without even realizing it, in the form of just binge watching 8 episodes of a show. You know, so did I enjoy watching the episode? Yes. And am I interested to see more? Yes. But if I was going to watch more, it has to be in a controlled environment. Because I know for a fact, if I was to binge this, I would get burnt out. I would totally get burned. It's just not designed for you to. So The Mandalorian is very much designed for you to binge watch it, right? Like even though they released it episodically, you watch it, then it was meant to be binge watched. Everything sort of flows directly from the last scene of the last into the present scene. What's going on? This show is not designed that way, and it. I didn't watch any more than the first this go around, but I have watched the whole series. If I was to go back, I can guarantee you, I would be like, wait, where are we now? You know, I would be very confused when you get episode to episode. So I don't want to hold that against the show, but if they were ever going to reboot it, they really would need to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Well, Netflix is making a movie.
Oh, that would work though.
I think a movie for Bebop could be good.
Yeah,
I think it absolutely could be. My concern is that it's Netflix doing it.
Yeah, that's fair.
So did Netflix make the Death Note movie?
Yes.
Yes.
Which I
There
love. Can I say I actually love the Death Note movie? Not because it's good, but because it really does feel like you're watching an anime.
I remember when I watched the Death Note movie, I went into it with the expectations like, okay, this is not going to be a like great faithful adaptation of the original, and that's kind of okay sometimes. And when I first watched it, I was kind of okay with it, and then it didn't take very long for me to be like, no.
It's interesting though. Some of the choices they made are very interesting, but there are older Death Note movies. Like there were Death Note movies that were live action movies made in Japan years and years ago. That are kind of ancillary to the story. They're not supposed to be faithful adaptations. They're kind of what if tales. And they're actually pretty good. Like fun to watch and stuff. The Netflix. So when I was trying to watch the Netflix one, I was like, this isn't what I want from a live action Death Note. It's not exactly what I'm after. And also, edgelordism doesn't play in live action.
Yeah,
like it just doesn't play.
Mm-hmm.
I think something that occurs to me, just like one more quick note before we move on to the break in the next show, is kind of like how long does a 24-minute episode feel? Like kind of how long, like how do you perceive it?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that interestingly, like Bebop and Standalone Complex, because they both had these kind of bottle episodes, as Dean's kind of been putting it today, these sort of like standalone pieces, self-contained, perhaps you could say. Those tend to feel a little bit longer to me than the shows that are trying to kind of be bingier. And it's interesting because, like, in a sense, they're kind of cramming more stuff into it. And I wonder if it's because of that you're kind of like having to focus and track things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whereas the other stuff, like maybe like less technically happens, but they sort of pace it in a way that kind of makes it feel quicker. So like
you can unfold a little differently.
Yeah, I think that, like, generally speaking, when I'm watching anime, the slowest 24 minutes are the shows that you're just like, oh my God, can this be over yet? Then next is like kind of self-contained things, maybe really dense things, weirdly enough. And then the fastest ones are like the like really lighthearted, maybe funny, kind of like quick moving and ones that like are kind of meant to string you from episode to episode. So I don't know, just an interesting trend I've just kind of noticed.
Well, our total score for Cowboy Bebop is a 19 or 95%.
Nice.
Wow.
I feel it, you know, when you said it the first time and we rolled right into this one, I didn't want to remark, but 55 for the Ghost in the Shell was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. It really did feel like a 55, and 95 really does feel like the right place for it to be.
It really
It's
does.
almost perfect.
Yeah. I'm really happy with how our rating system turned out. All right. Shall we take a quick break before we get into the last two shows?
Sounds good.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
All right.
We'll be right back.
In the future, just computers. No one here to start a war. We're forgotten, just a picture. No one looks at anymore. In a world where we forget about our mothers, maybe we deserve to fade away. 'Cause if lost it all. We always thought we'd make the world better, but look at us now, we've fallen so far. In a world where we forget about our mothers, maybe we deserve to fade out. 'Cause if we don't give a fuck about each other, it's over. If we fall, blame it on the humans. Yeah, if we fall, who saves us from these movies?
songs.
Speaking of the best theme songs, the next show we have to talk about is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
Indeed.
Whoops, I forgot to hit the translation
JoJo's.
button. Okay, there we are.
JoJo.
Hey,
Dean, will you tell us about JoJo?
Yeah. Okay. So I have never watched JoJo's before. I know it's terrible.
What?
But this is a show with a following. Like this show really has a following. So I was interested to see like how it starts. So we have a
meta real fast before you give your recap. I actually had to ask Jake where to start for this. Because I was looking at it, I was like, so there's a series of OVAs from 98 or something.
Yep.
But then the first series I could like actually find anywhere was from, it was a full 26 episode
It's like
season from 2012.
12 or 13. Yeah.
That's the ones that people really talk about when they talk about the show.
Yeah.
That's what they're. That's usually.
So
what
that's
they're
where we
You're talking about,
started.
like, the beginning of Jonathan's arc.
Yep.
Like in the when they go. Yeah, go ahead, dude. I can't do this myself. But can I give a point of order? There's a point of appreciation that I'd like to, because this really is my favorite anime and one of my favorite TV shows. And there's something that I know that a lot of people do not know that I think really enhances sort of what this show does. All of the characters, when speaking Japanese, speak in the accent of the nationality they're supposed to be, which I just think is really something that I really enjoy, because you can hear it when Dio's dad is speaking Japanese, but he's rolling his R's and it sounds Italian. And then Jonathan speaks with an English accent, but in Japanese.
Interesting, because
so,
I've always wondered, like, what do different accents sound like in a different language?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that I that's what I understand was the case. Somebody who I trust told me that. Somebody who's kind of into the whole.
I
thing.
noticed. I didn't quite put my finger on what it was, but I did notice there was like an accent to some of the characters.
Yes.
Throughout.
So that just a point, because nobody knows that, and I really think that once you realize that, you go, oh, there's a little something more to these characters than just, oh, they're just kind of like stereotypes of the nationalities. They actually go into it. I like it. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Tino.
No, that's awesome. That's actually really good to know. I didn't catch that, but I'm probably gonna keep watching this, so I'll be listening for it.
Oh, if you keep watching it, we gotta review it.
There's a we open up the first episode of this is actually pretty simple. It's pretty basic. A to B story. We open up. There's a crash carriage in a rain. In the rain. There's not one rain. There's multiple rain drops falling. It's in a rainstorm, but it's in the rain because the rain is plural, I think, on its own. Anyway, so there's a carriage that's crashed. It looks like it fell off of like a mountain pass. And there's this old guy, and I'm assuming his wife, and it is his wife. It ends up being later on, but there's this old guy and his wife, and they see that this carriage is crashed, and the old guy's like, "Hey man, I'm gonna go steal the boots off a dead man." So he goes down there, and he like they go and they start he starts trying to steal shit, and the wife is like, "Dude, there's like a living baby who's like trapped in the there's like a living baby in there. The mom isn't alive, but the baby, there's a living child, and you're worried about stealing rings, you asshole." So
He's
they're
He's the best in that he is the worst.
Yeah, he is,
exactly.
He really is the best.
So they so then the guy that he's stealing the rings off of wakes up, and he's like, "Hey man, you came to save me. You're great. My family owes you a great debt. But I'm gonna die anyway, so peace." And he dies. And
Does he?
they
No?
No,
doesn't he die?
No, because he's the dad.
Yeah, that's the
Wait a
dad.
minute. Then I
Yes.
misunderstood.
Dino,
Then I
the guy
misunderstood
who
a part of the
listen,
story.
The guy who gets into the crash in the carriage is Jonathan's father, who lives up until when you see it. Well, you'll see.
Right.
And then the guy who comes and rescues Jonathan's father is, I forget his name.
Dio.
Brando. I just don't remember the first name. God, the
Dio
show has the best. I don't know what you call it. I hope this is not an offensive term. You know, I'm just gonna call it Japan English, because there's another
Yeah.
word for it, and I'm not sure if it's offensive or not anymore. But this has the best display of that whole thing. Yeah. So the Dio's family meets Jonathan's family, like in this event. So, but everyone ends up living except Jonathan's mother. Everybody ends up living except Jonathan's mother.
And the driver, I think, is dead too.
And the driver.
I'll swing around to what I misunderstood when I'm done, like running down the actual episode.
You understand that. It's very important you understand that the only person who dies is Jonathan's mother, because the mask is Jonathan's mother's property. Like, that's Jonathan's mother's sort of whole thing.
Okay, so we end up having this. It's interesting. It's good that you bring up the mask, because when they're standing there talking and like, "You saved us and my family owes you a great debt," we then see that there's this mask that was involved in the crash somehow. It's sitting off to the side as if it was thrown from the carriage, and blood is running around along the ground, and it gets to the mask, and the mask sprouts like spider legs for a moment, and then we cut to the OP. Or no, we cut to, I can't remember. Anyway, at some point, it's several years later, and we have this girl is being tortured. There, she's probably about 12. What do you think? 13. She's being tortured by the rural English equivalent of neighborhood boys.
I think tortured might be too strong a word, more like tormented.
Yeah, like they're picking on her.
They're picking.
And they start being like, "Hey, you're crying, you're a crybaby, have a." And our grown-up version of our baby who was in the carriage, his name is Jonathan Joestar. That's his name. And he jumps up on a wall, and he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna kick your ass for picking on this girl, not because I know her or even give a shit about her, but because I'm a gentleman." And
he's the purest essence of good, Dino. He represents good. He represents good itself.
So he jumps off the wall and he gets his ass kicked, and he also kicks some ass while at it, but he does get his ass kicked. And he the girl's like, "You're like looking at him like you're cool." She picks up his handkerchief as he's batting at his bleeding nose, and he drops his handkerchief and he starts going home. And she picks up his handkerchief and she sees his name. She now knows who he is. Now, during this entire scene, we have had interlaced A and B plots. That was the A plot. That's Jonathan's plot. Yes. During that scene, we also have cut into it the B plot. The B plot is the child of the guy who was stealing the rings off of Jonathan's father. They're living in what's the socioeconomic situation of this family?
Destitute.
Poor.
Yes, exactly.
English peasantry.
Yeah, in the English version of poor, which is almost worse than regular poor. Anyway, so
this
they're
takes
there.
place in what, like 1870s Victorian England. So there's
Exactly.
Victorian England. Yeah.
it's terrible. It's horrible.
And so they're during this, we're seeing that Dio, his name is Dio, by the way. Dio Brando. He's abused by his father. Their mother is nowhere to be seen, and at one point Dio says, I believe in passing, that like you made mother run away or something to that effect.
Yes. Yep.
And so we see that he's abused, and his father's like sitting sick in bed, and he's like, hey man, get me and Dio's like, medicine? And the dad's like, no, booze, you shit heel, and throws a bottle at him. And then so Dio goes to this place and beats a guy at chess to make some money, presumably to buy his father some booze. And then he gets abused by that guy. And then he goes back to his dad, and this is all interlaced between, again, in that other scene. This is the B plot. And the dad's like, hey man, I'm like dying. So when I die, you take this letter and you take it to the Joestar mansion, because those motherfuckers owe me, and bitch better have my money. And so Dio's like, all right, man, I got you. And then the dad probably calls him a shitheel just for fun. He doesn't. He actually says he's smart and tells him to become the richest man on the planet, which is not gonna happen, because that's the guy who owns the Mexican telecom company. Anyway,
just wait. Well, you better just wait, to be honest, because you'll be surprised.
So we get a scene of the funeral. The dad is dead, and immediately from the funeral he goes to the Joestar mansion with presumably with the letter, but it seems at that point as if he's already contacted them. I think there was a time skip, because it seems as though he's already contacted them, because Jojo knows who he is when he gets out of the carriage. He's like, so you're Dio Brando? And he's like, yeah, man, I am. I'm gonna be moving in, and also I'm gonna kick the shit out of your dog.
And then he straight up doinks the dog.
I thought he killed the fucking animal, because like he kicks. He kicks the shit out of the dog. Dio's like, hey man, that's my dog. He's real nice. He's a good guy. He won't bite you. And he starts to walk up to Dio, and Dio just kicks the living shit out of this animal. And it hurts my heart.
Can I ask, by the way, what did you feel? Because that scene in particular does something Jojo does really well. The colored palette changes. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Isn't that really mood setting?
You get like an interesting kind of, and they do it like to a greater and lesser extent from shot to shot.
Yeah. It's constantly changing.
Like, because some of them are like super dramatic color shifts, like everything's red.
The one when he when the dog gets kicked, Dio's face right afterwards, it's like yellow. It's like it's bright yellow. It's really good. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So he kicks the shit out of the dog, and then Jojo's like, "Man, why would you do that?" And Dio's like, "Man, it was running at me. Like, what am I gonna do?" And then the dad comes out. Jojo's dad comes out, and he's like, "Hey, man, Dio's gonna be hanging out with us, staying with us. So, just like live as if you're my son." And it's cool, whatever. So Dio's hanging out. They at one point, it's very, very soon after this, they get inside. He gets introduced to everybody, and Dio tells Jojo, he's like, "Hey, man, I kicked your dog on purpose. I just don't like dogs, and I don't like you, and I'm probably gonna try and fuck your mother. Like, I'm that kind of asshole."
He's very clearly trying to establish dominance over Jojo. Yeah.
Being
That's
accompanied
exactly right.
by Billie Eilish music.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So he's like, so he's there, and so we get like a montage of why can't you be more like Dio? Like, where the dad is constantly like berating Jojo for not being as good and cool as Dio.
It's like, clearly I've spoiled you. I've failed as a father, but that stops today. That sort of thing.
Right. Exactly. I'm gonna make you more like this obvious sociopath. Anyway, so
British noble tree, am I right?
Yeah. So they're there and they're then JoJo is, you know, like taking on their boxing recreationally, and JoJo's there and he's like taking all comers, man. He's like, come on, let's do this. Dio's like, yeah, me, motherfucker. So they get in and Dio, like the rules of this boxing match are very strange because it's one hit to the face and you win. So like,
Isn't it like karate? Isn't that just what karate is?
I have no idea, but so they're there and they're boxing, and JoJo is fast and obviously good, but he's not that good because Dio's dodging, you know, and you know, playing at, you know, floating like a butterfly, and JoJo gets fucking smashed in the face, and then Dio, like on purpose, jams his thumb into JoJo's eye socket while he's punching him, so he hurts the motherfucker. And then we get some internal monologue from Dio that's like, yeah, man, I am going to take your fucking life, dude. I am going to absolutely wreck your shit, sir. I am going to be so much better than you at everything that your dad is going to love me more than he loves you, and he's going to give me all your shit. Which seems to be the plan. So then he starts spreading rumors about JoJo and saying JoJo's a snitch and this motherfucker's terrible. And so nobody wants to talk to him. He tries to make him lonely. He's like, hey, man, you break a man with loneliness. And I'm like, I feel called out. So JoJo then, though, starts talking to that girl who he helped at the beginning of the episode. Remember her?
Oh,
She's
my
back.
God.
And he starts talking to her and he's like, hey, babe, let me get it in. And so they start like dating and stuff. He doesn't do that. He's a nice
it's a
guy.
little bit more genteel at the time.
So
well, okay, let's wait to what Dio does, but
I know.
it's heavily not genteel in
Yeah, well,
implication.
Yeah, for sure.
what they do, they start kind of going out, sort of. It's courting. It's classic courting, man. It's kind of sweet. And then Dio is like, there's a little bit of a time skip, and Dio's like, man, why isn't JoJo miserable? This motherfucker should be like eating a bullet by now. Nobody likes him. He should be lonely and an empty shell of a man. Why is he not miserable? And then he realizes like, because this motherfucker's got a girl, right? This motherfucker is looking forward to getting some. And so he then catches the girl off guard and unawares on like a rural road, and then he sexually assaults this woman.
Oh yeah.
Did
you get the implication? Obviously, it's very classily done by it's a kiss, but did you get the implication a lot more than a kiss was meant to be displayed?
Right. It was obviously supposed to be much more violent than they were willing to show us. Like,
well, also I think like at that time too.
If this was Berserk, we would have just seen a rape.
That's exactly right.
I think they imply. I mean, like I think the significance that was implied is that bad. I think though they did just mean for it to be a kiss because at that time when like you're all like worried about your honor and like, you know, kind of all this sort of stuff. It's
right.
I don't know, man. I don't remember have you watched more than just this episode, Chris?
A little bit more.
Do you remember what he does to the woman and her baby?
I don't know if I got that far. What episode was that?
I think it might have been 2 or 3. There's a later scene. Dino, I have to spoil this part, but you'll see it and it will still be shocking. Or you can mute if you want. But there's a part where he basically turns a woman into a vampire and makes her eat her own child.
I think I might recall that.
Oh my god.
And so I always thought it was more than just a kiss. I don't know.
I think it's interesting.
I can't imagine Dio walking away after a kiss, you know, like stealing a kiss from her and running away. This is like the pure embodiment of evil.
What Chris said following that actually kind of leads to that a little bit is like the way that they treat it is as if this were a rape.
Yes.
But like,
yeah, absolutely.
It's absolutely just a kiss, and then he hits her. But like, it's absolutely just a kiss and a smack. But the way that they treat it is as though she
That's
were.
a good way of putting it. Yeah,
attacked.
that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
So that happens. And then Dio's like, "Hey, man, your first kiss, wink, I guess, was with me." And not with him. And she's like,
it wasn't with JoJo, it was with me, Dio.
Right, exactly. and then she is washing her mouth out with puddle water, and this is so we get the sense that this is obviously a resilient woman of some kind or another. That pisses him off. He goes up and he like smacks her, and I want to point out how fucking incredible this shot is. So right before he smacks, as he's reeling back to do so, we get a close up of her face, and I don't know if I've ever seen defiance in a still shot like this before. Like
it's real
the
good.
close up that we get of her face is she is obviously like, you motherfucker, you absolute piece of shit, and you can like see it. It's in her face, man. Anyway, so he smacks her, and she is then embarrassed to like, she doesn't want to talk to JoJo. She doesn't want to be around him. And then JoJo asks some miscreants in town what the hell happened to her. Like, what did you motherfuckers do? And there were two of those miscreants there with Dio when he did this. And so presumably they tell him, and he's running back to the fucking house. He slams into the door. He's running full tilt at Dio, and Dio has time to monologue, which is another thing I love about this show, is the fact that we see the scale of our scene. We know how big this living room, this like foyer, and then other area is. We know how fast JoJo's running. We know that he's gonna be there in a matter of seconds, but we still get this like dialogue, we still get this monologue from Dio that's like, yeah, you figured it out, didn't you? Ha ha, motherfucker, I'm ruining your shit, aren't I? Yeah, look at you, bitch. Yeah, look at you. Like we get this amazing monologue in the amount of time that it takes him to run up. So then they fight, and what this is, it calls back kind of to the earlier boxing match. I thought much didn't happen, but I guess more happened than I thought, because this is going on.
There's a lot of
so they're fighting, and Dio kind of realizes that like he's getting very angry, and it's making him a little sloppy, and it's making JoJo stronger. Like JoJo is apparently like the Hulk, where if you hit him, he only gets angrier and stronger. And so and I'm not saying it's a superpower or anything, it's just a thing. It's a personality thing. So they're fighting, and JoJo beats the living shit out of Dio, who then stands up, and he's like, you motherfucker. He pulls a knife out, and then the dad breaks up the fight. And of course thinks JoJo's a dick because JoJo was beating the living shit out of Dio, but like, you don't know what happened, man.
He said specifically, it's like you were attacking him when he was down. So it's like, boys fight, that can't be avoided, but then you were kicking a man when he's down, and that's just bad.
Right. So. And it's like, no, if you only knew, sir. So following this, we get the one of the servants is turning on the incinerator to get rid of the trash. The incinerator door starts shaking, and then we get a cut to I can't remember what comes first, Dio monologuing to himself, or it's the burial.
We cut to the burial first.
We cut to the burial, and they are burying JoJo's dog, because holy shit, Dio put the dog in the incinerator. What the fuck, man? And then we get Dio, who's like, man, JoJo's more resilient than I thought. I gotta learn to calm down and be a little bit more conniving. And then the episode ends, and holy fuck, like what the hell?
And Dio gets away with it because they're like, oh yeah, the police suspected that it was a burglar trying to get rid of the guard dog or something like that.
Right. So that they could come burgle the home later. Now, the thing that I missed, and I don't know why I missed this, because it tracks and the guy looks the exact same. I thought that the dad died. That Dio was the baby and they stole him.
I could see how you could read
so
that way.
I also thought that until we cut to the scene of Jonathan and Joseph at their house.
I couldn't remember if that's exactly what he looked like, and I was like,
yeah,
I thought it was like, it's similar, and I thought it might just be like his brother, because the Joestar family could just be a rich family, like it just could be the brother of the guy who died in the carriage crash. I think
see again, color is really important here, but I could be wrong. Didn't the baby have blue hair?
I don't remember. I do
guess
not
that's
remember.
still very subtle, and you'd have to know to be looking at hair color.
Yeah, I think the baby
but
did
I
have
think-
blue hair.
I think that may have been how they avoided the two baby situation thing. Yeah.
Right. But
know.
my read on it, which was wrong looking at it now, it's like obviously Dio's the biological son of the asshole who was stealing rings off a dead man. The like that totally tracks now looking at it, but at the time I was like, so he stole the baby. Like that's just immediately the thought
Right.
that was in my head, and which made it confusing
Mhm.
when they show up at the house and it's like, you guys are the same age, and it's like, well, wait a minute, what? That doesn't track. Anyway, yeah, so I just thought that was I that's the thing that I failed to track, I guess, but it makes more sense now.
So one of the things that stands out to me about JoJo's is I've seen maybe I want to say like 6-ish episodes because Jake wanted to introduce me to it at one point. And one of the things that actually surprised me is because like I'd seen various clips from JoJo, and I guess that part of the idea of the series is that Dio is immortal because he's a vampire. So he's lived for a long time, and then there are like multiple JoJos. There's like a lineage of JoJos
Yes,
where
it's like a lineal show. Yeah.
so because the JoJo is just like short for, in this case, for Jonathan Joestar, and so there's someone else with a Jo name Joestar later on, which is interesting. So like I was really surprised to see the settings of Victorian England, because I think what I tend to see is like closer to modern day.
Which you do, which you get to.
Yeah,
And it's weird when you look at the pilot and then you could maybe go 50 episodes later and it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This is the same show.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So that was interesting. And then also like they do a really good job of like, I think the way that I described it when I first watched it was it's very operatic in the sense that it's like much larger than life. There's like a lot of like, we are going to talk about what's about to happen, and then action happens. And like I've complained before a lot about like when shonen do that thing where they like fight, talk, fight. But here it feels like theatrical in a way that kind of makes it work.
Theatrical is the perfect word. It
Yeah,
feels like theater.
You constantly like the characters are always like the main characters especially are always like, you know, in this pose, like there's the Dio pose of like, you know, kind of like arms crossed, like standing up, and like every time you see like it's like every shot's a hero shot, right? Like they're you don't see people in just kind of like this normal neutral thing. It's always, like I said, a theatrical, over the top. Like and Dio is like comically villainous,
Mhm.
except
Yes.
that the tone of the
Yes.
show makes it feel kind of believable. Like the first thing he does is like when he like we see him getting abused, and it's like very stereotypical, like, oh, he's getting bottles thrown at him by his drunk father. A guy loses to him in chess and shoves his face into a bowl, and then he kicks the dog, he kills the dog, you know, like all this different stuff. Like he is just like I said, if the tone was any more serious, which it's funny because it's like it's serious and it's not, it's bizarre. Haha.
Yeah.
Then like we'd be complaining that it's like, what the fuck is this shit? I don't believe any of this. And yet the way they present everything, it's like I'm totally on board for all of it. I'm not entirely sure how they do it.
I don't know. It didn't succeed quite as well for me. Towards the end, I had less problems with it. I think I just didn't know, because I haven't seen JoJo's at all before either. So this was my first introduction, and theatrical is a good way to put it, and I wasn't expecting that initially. So I definitely, more at the start of the episode than the end, didn't
I
believe.
think perhaps the
Dio.
reason, because I think I might have reacted similarly to you if I hadn't had at least some context before of like having seen some scenes and like knowing how weird it gets. I think I've just kind of like prepared for the weird, and so when the weird started happening, I was kind of like, okay, this is what it is. So yeah, that is interesting.
That's fair. I was expecting weird, but I was expecting a different kind of weird. So it took me a few minutes to orient.
I tried to go into it knowing it was going to be weird, but not expecting a specific weird. And it worked for me. I think in part because of that, because I wasn't thinking about, like, I went into Space Dandy knowing what the aesthetic of Space Dandy is when we talked about Space Dandy before. I went into Space Dandy knowing what the aesthetic of Space Dandy was, so I was expecting the kind of weird that Space Dandy is. This, I only know the memes I've seen. So it's like I was like, I know it's strange because the memes are strange and the people who make the memes like strange things. So like I know it's gonna be weird, but I don't know I don't know what strain of weird it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of rolled with it, and it ended up working really well for me too.
I love it. Love it.
So this is a generational story. Like this
Yes.
is a story that
And
follows.
actually, to be honest with you, Dino, eventually that gets abandoned too, and it's just because, like, again, he rebooted the whole universe with a different person named JoJo who has no original connection to Jonathan Joestar. So at this point, it's just let's get as weird as possible with it. It
Nice.
really is. It became a show dedicated to seeing how weird it could be, while still being like a good thing, like a good product, not just like
I appreciate
like
that.
Wario Worlds. Like, just let's get really weird, but try and keep it cohesive.
I
Yeah,
actually
I
appreciate
love
the
it.
hell out of that. That's a kind of storytelling I can absolutely get behind. Is like, what's the strangest we can go and still have
Yeah.
it be cohesive?
Oh my god, once stands get into the whole thing, like the things that stands do,
Posting
it just
K-pop
becomes
gifs everywhere.
yeah. Yeah, Jesus.
Stands and stands are two different things, Dean.
Standardiza.
Oh, okay.
With the D, yes.
This is you're making fun of my speech impediment from being from New York. Yeah, it gets very strange, and honestly, the first season is my favorite season, and the first book is my favorite book. But it really does change, and it changes in a way that if they kept the same story going, nobody would watch it. But what they managed to do is really brilliant. Keep sort of the essence of the story and just remove everything else, like kind of how you do with myth. Just kind of generally, like it's
Mythic's
a very
another good
interesting
term for it, actually. Yeah, well, like lots of archetypes.
Yeah, well, Jonathan is good. You know, he's pure good, and then you get to, Golden Wind, which is I think the newest English translated one. I'm pretty sure. I don't think there's a dub yet, but I definitely the English translation is fully out. And that one is like he's half Dio and half Jonathan. So now you go, okay, so what is his makeup going to be like? It's sort of like every previous season can be viewed as like contributing to the lore of the show, but do not expect any callbacks other than Dio, who manages to be like sort of a continuity throughout the whole thing.
There's also kind of like, I think, a consistent aesthetic in that, like, pretty quickly you start to get like the classic rock references and stuff like that.
Yes. Which, do not watch the dub. If you're gonna continue watching this, do not watch the dub, because they don't. Obviously, it's not the same. They're not allowed to even like. I think one of the, like, Def Leppard, for example, they couldn't say Def Leppard in the English, so they just completely changed the name of it. And AC/DC, they couldn't do it. So you have to watch it in the Japanese to really get the full effect.
I hate that. I hate that localization, like when it actually ruins jokes and references. It's like, God damn it.
Well, plus, I think the Japanese, like, you're going to get the purest, like that particular brand of voice acting too.
Yes.
The very like over dramatic.
I was going to say, so one of the big examples is there's a character whose name is Ton Petty, but in the English, his name is Ton. They go, oh, it's Ton Petty. And it's like,
Ton
no.
Petty, yeah.
In the Japanese, it's Tom Petty. Like, first of all, they don't say N. They basically say Tom Petty as one word, and they always emphasize it in the right. It's just, there's so much more character in the original version. It's way better. I would really recommend the original version. Really adds a lot to it. Dino, did you watch the English dub?
No. I know.
Okay,
I watched this. I watched this in Japanese on Crunchyroll.
Yeah, it's the way to go.
Me too.
It's the way to go.
I also noticed after I had gotten through the first episode, so there's on Crunchyroll, there's the season 1, but then there's a season 1 re-edited version.
Oh, like they recut the first season?
Yeah. So I was gonna look at that and see what the differences are.
Mm.
But I
If they,
didn't get a chance
it's
to do that before this podcast.
it's possible they like just tightened it up a little because
I was thinking it's
this
probably like
show felt-
a Dragon Ball Z Kai kind of thing where they like condensed
Right.
it.
It's also possible, if I had to guess, because I also noticed that on Funimation, I didn't see what the alternative was, but the version of Cowboy Bebop I watched was the uncut version. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there was some sort of like censorship in the original English port, because like sometimes like Pokemon, I think, is an example of like the original series had some violence and stuff that they would cut out. So I think that there might have just been some things that when they brought it to America, they cut out certain content, and maybe what we're seeing is just the uncut, uncensored version.
There was also localization stuff in Pokemon where like instead of like rice balls, they would make it into hamburgers
Donuts
and
yeah.
stuff like
Yep.
that. Yeah, donuts. So yeah, it could be stuff like that, just like localization
Good
tweaks
old
that they
4
did.
kids.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's going to come into play in the next one. The next show we talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I don't have a whole lot else to say about this, just because I haven't seen it. So if anyone has any
That's the
closing
thing.
thoughts,
I feel like I'm stumbling talking about this show because like I know it has a dedicated fan base. I know it's got like that instant classic kind of quality about it. I enjoyed watching this first episode, but I know so little about the show itself and like where it goes. I
was gonna say, even when I originally watched it and I went back and I watched it, it takes about 3 episodes until you understand where you're going. Because as far as I remember, he doesn't even turn into a vampire in the first episode.
No, he
No.
doesn't.
No.
It's like
And his being a vampire is essential to the entire show. It's completely essential, and you have no idea what the mask is. I think that was the point of the first episode, was to kind of give you think of it like a unaired pilot. Because
right.
the second episode really does a lot more to put you into the show. The first one is, which is actually kind of, well, I guess it's a lot like a lot of animes do this, but it's a pure exposition show.
it's
Mhm.
establishing
They
the characters.
decided to make the bad decision of making the pure exposition show the pilot, which
Yeah.
sort of doesn't, you know what I mean? Like,
It doesn't really
I almost would have said, guys, what you should do is watch the second episode, not the first one. I almost wish I would have suggested that, because I bet you would go, okay, I don't know the backstory to these characters, but all right, there's a mask and it turns someone into a vampire, and that guy's real bad and we got to get rid of him. At least then you know where you're going with it.
I think I like having seen the first one first, because when I mentioned that I've like seen like up to 6-ish previously, and so I watched like 1, 2, 3 basically all in a row, and
Yes, that's
2
that was best for me too. That's
Yeah.
what I did.
You say like taking the one by itself maybe isn't the greatest thing, but like 1 plus 2 I think is good, because they sort of like become brothers, friends, like as they get older. But then when Dio starts to get up to his own shenanigans, you know that like who he actually is based on what you see in episode 1. So
maybe
I
it
think
should have been like a double length pilot almost.
Yeah.
Like where you get all of the establishing material and then you actually get the because there's very little, if any. In fact, I don't think there's any. The only introduction that we get to anything supernatural in this show is when the mask just gets spider legs when it gets blood on.
Mhm.
Like that's the only supernatural stuff we get in the first episode. And that happens like twice. And there's an interesting thing too. At the end of it, they kind of give away some stuff. In the ED.
The ED. You kind of get like this like Mayan or Aztec kind of origin implied by
Right.
like the wall carving.
Yep.
The wall carving has a sacrifice that and the guy that's doing, the priest whatever that's doing the sacrificing, is wearing that mask, and you see it in the carving that's that's behind the credits in the ED. So they kind of give some stuff away there.
And there's like a blood channel where like the blood flows throughout the ED until it eventually reaches the mask, and then the mask like shakes, and then like the eyes start glowing and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So it's interesting that they chose that. I kind of get. I think it probably would be better off as like a double length pilot as opposed to being split up the way.
Because there's nothing I would.
Honestly, even triple length, because if I'm recalling the story correctly, it really does take until that third episode to round out the full like when you meet, I think because the third episode is where he meets. Does he meet Zeppeli in the third episode? So he basically meets the full crew by episode 3, which is it really would have done better as just like, let's make this an hour and 15 minutes long, crush all 3 of those episodes together. That would have been better. But you could probably say that for a lot of TV shows.
Yeah.
You can. The episodic format's limiting in that way. Maybe if it just started with an OVA. Just
Like,
start the show with an
one of
OVA
those.
and go from there.
This is one of those shows when
Yeah.
people talk about the 3-episode rule. Like, I think that they made that rule for stuff like this, where it does take a little while to kind of like fully establish, because we basically get in the first 3 or 4 episodes kind of like the origin story, and then the adventure kind of kicks off in earnest.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Whereas, but part of the thing that we do with our show is that it's like, what did we get in just one episode?
Yes. Yeah. Which in this case, not much.
Yeah, it's very little, but I will say it's enough to keep me interested, if for no other reason than the aesthetic stuff. Like, it would be very easy if I had no familiarity with JoJo whatsoever, like if I hadn't seen the memes and discussion surrounding it, it would be very easy for me to not know that vampires are a part of this story.
Exactly, 100%. 100%. In fact, based on the rules of this format, they don't exist.
Right.
They might.
Right. It seems like there's obviously something supernatural because the mask reacts to blood and blah blah blah. But it would be very easy to go into this knowing nothing and not even know that vampire stuff's coming up. So I don't know. It's that being said, it has enough. The show has attitude and like tone and sort of not quite aesthetic, but style, like in spades.
Mhm.
And that would be enough to keep me going, I think, even if I didn't know that this was like a show with a big following that is generational, etc., etc. If I didn't have the general understanding of what JoJo's is, the aesthetic alone might be enough to carry me, because God, it has a lot of style. It is stylistic as hell.
Yeah, speaking of, you want to go ahead and get into your ratings, Dean?
Yeah, I can do that. I don't have a title for this one. Sorry about that. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
I was gonna say, to be honest with you, dude, there's already too many JoJo titles. You really don't.
As far as scenario interest, look, I don't know this. I don't know if I would watch JoJo if it wasn't JoJo. I don't know if I would if it didn't have the following and the sort of if I didn't hear sort of through culture that it's great and I should watch it. I don't know if I would watch it. Because I think it would just kind of get conflated with like Dororo and other sort of off the wall sort of shows in my mind.
That's actually precisely why my friend will not watch it, is because he knows the only reason that he's being told to is because everyone else does. That's funny.
I don't know if I would watch it if that influence didn't exist. So I don't know if I can say that I was interested in the scenario on its face. Like the story that we get is sociopath moves into this kid's house, and starts to try and take over the kid's life.
Yes.
And then they fight, and at the end of the episode, we know there's a weird mask, and at the end of the episode we get almost literally, and then time passes, and then credits.
Yeah,
So
it's funny because two or three episodes later, there's like he fights like a 50-foot tall stone giant that wields a sword 2 episodes after what you just described.
Right. So I cannot, I don't think, give it a point for scenario interest just based on episode 1 alone. The production, though, it definitely gets a point for. It's beautiful and it's stylistic and the music's good, and the when they do like the character introduction cards, it's in like a style that's kind of reminiscent of older anime, but it looks cleaner and it looks better. So I definitely will give it a point for production. The storytelling I thought was really good. Like, I understand exactly what happened here. Well, I didn't when I watched it, but I really think that was my fault. I don't think that was the fault of the show. I think the show tried to tell me what was happening, and I just kind of didn't listen to it. I really don't think it was the show's fault that happened. But outside of that, like, the storytelling was really good. I know Dio, I know Jojo, I know these characters, or at least how much I'm supposed to know about them now. And I think it probably gets a point for that. I did enjoy watching it, and I am interested to see more. So it's gonna get a 4 for me.
All right, then I also don't have a title for this show.
It's so hard because it's so weird on its own. It's like, what's the joke? Where do you make a joke?
I think. Did the premise interest me? I think I'm gonna have to agree with Dean on this one. Just from the first episode, the premise as presented isn't interesting in and of itself. It's knowing what the show becomes later that's interesting. So I'm not gonna give it a point for that. Did the production impress me? Yeah, the show looked great. Did the storytelling impress me? Yes, for slightly different reasons than Dean. I mentioned that I wasn't on board through the first part of it, but it did a pretty good job of showing me kind of what it was trying to do and getting me on board later into the episode. Characterization was pretty good, and I was able to follow it. I didn't have the issues that Dean did. Did I enjoy the first episode? Yes. Overall, by the end, I enjoyed it, and am I interested to see more? Yeah, actually, I think the thing with the mask at the end is a good enough hook, even if you don't know the show by reputation. So I am also going to give this a 4. Bird?
Well, this is a 5 out of 5. The only thing in my head is Jojo.
I know.
That's what this show ends up becoming when you really think about it. Did the premise interest me? It did enough for this to be the first anime that I ever sort of watched in its entirety. I know it's technically still ongoing, but the first season at the very least. Did the production impress me? It's still to this day. I don't know why more shows don't play with color more. It is such a persuasive and subtle device. It manages to be completely overt and yet not heavy-handed. It fits in perfectly with the theme of the show, and I really think it's brilliant. Did the storytelling impress me? Yes, it does enough for me to. So what I appreciate about the show is that the characters really are not meant in the way that, you Spike Spiegel is like a character that you look at and you're like, I want to get to know this guy. It's JoJo is about just being in the moment in the way that the show is. You don't really get to know many of the characters long enough. I guess Joseph, you get to learn a little bit more about. He's got the longest arc as far as I know. Jotaro too, but the storytelling impresses me because it is something that I don't see much in anime. It's just about the event rather than the characters, and I appreciate that. Did I enjoy watching it? Of course I did. And am I interested to see more? Not only am I interested to see more, Jolene is coming up in the next iteration of this show. The first straight up female JoJo character, and her scenario is in a prison. And I'm very interested to see that whole season when it
Oh my
finally.
God, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. Actually, Dino, you have your phone on. You have something you can Google with. Go look up. I don't remember what her last name is. It might be Joestar, but look up Jolene. It might be Joestar. Jolene Cujo. Just look up Jolene Joestar, and it'll take you to Jolene Cujo. Look her up because I'm like, this is totally the vibe. This is gonna be. She's great. She's probably my favorite JoJo character outside of Jonathan. So I'm looking. Not only did I am I interested to see more.
Dude!
Yeah, isn't she cool? Isn't she cool? She's got a great design.
Dude, I'm gonna screen share this real quick. This is amazing looking.
Yeah. It's very cool. It's super cool. Not only am I interested to see more, I am interested to see a whole lot more, even from a show that's been going for a very long time and already has some very powerful characters in it. I still think there's a lot more going. Yeah, man, it's amazing. It's amazing, and
Dude,
like serious
I'm
props.
about it.
Yeah. she's great, man. Serious props to Hirohiko Araraki because he is gotta be one of the most original big names out there. Still original and still one of the hugest names. You know, a lot of those underground guys are busting their asses making mangas every day. They fucking put out a new serial and they are creative as hell, and you got to really appreciate them. I guarantee you most of them are looking at Hirohiko Araki like this is the hero. This is the guy who still to this day puts out original stuff. So I have absolute praise for the show and really the manga too and the whole thing. So 5 out of 5. Jojo.
And Chris?
All right, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure episode 1, Bastard Killed My Dog. Did the premise interest me? Like, this is a weird one to answer, like you guys have said, because it's like I have a vague sense of what JoJo's is. But as far as what the show presents, larger than life, operatic, coming of age tale set in Victorian England with a weird twist. I'm not sure if that gets me. So I'm going to say no. Did the production impress me? It's not quite blow me away, but I think I am going to give it a yes. Just because, like you guys said, it's style for days. It definitely, like, even from episode 1, has this very distinctive kind of like, this is kind of a breed unto itself of anime, and I think that I have to give it props for that. Did the storytelling impress me? I'll say yeah, because it definitely, on paper, a lot of it feels very generic, and in the way that to like the whole like sort of dynamic of the good kid who's being kind of like usurped by the guy who kind of gets away with everything, so he kind of gets blamed for like all these things. But it's like, why can't you guys just see that he's like an asshole? It's like, I don't see that. You know, like that whole kind of deal. Like, that's not a super new idea. So it's generic, but they do kind of establish the characters well, and like I said, that style, they make the sort of like theatricality of the whole thing work. So I have to give them props for that. I will say I enjoyed the first episode. They make me interested to see more. I'm not sure if the first one unto itself did. When I first watched it, I went through, like I said, like the first 2, 3, 4, like pretty much back to back. Because I was being shown it by a friend, and we, you know, like we were just sort of sitting down, we were watching a bunch of it. So it did like flow nicely into the next one. I remember when I first watched it, but sitting down and just watching the first one, would it make me interested to keep going? Really on the fence, but I think I got to give it a no. Aside from the promise of like just knowing the weird that we get to eventually. And even then, like after like the first 6 or so, like I haven't gotten back around to watching it because I sort of fizzled out at some point. Like the sort of cyclical nature of like what ends up happening with like we're faced with an obstacle and then like it looks hopeless, but then JoJo is like, I'm just going to try real hard. And then he overcomes the obstacle. Like that started to just kind of get old to me after a little while, to the place where like maybe there's something like down the line that make it all worth it, but it kind of maybe lose interest.
By the 3rd season, the big hurdles are you have to play a card game with this weird merchant who's going to put you in the shadow dimension if you lose the card game. It's very not generic very quickly.
Yeah.
That is so weird. I'm thinking about this show. If JoJo's not JoJo, and if we're doing AniFiles when this show begins, and we look at episode 1 of this show,
right, we would not like it. We wouldn't like it.
No, it would be garbage. It would be like, oh, it looks great, but it's not interesting.
It's like, oh,
that would be what we say.
But
or at most, I think
like that. Do you remember Breaking Bad? Do you remember?
Yeah.
The first season of Breaking Bad is not good.
Yeah.
It's you watch it. The first episode's like, oh, so he's a school teacher and he's gonna sell meth, and it's like that doesn't sound good. It sounds like kind of like it has a bad message and it will.
It sounds maybe a little bit preachy, actually. Like
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so it's like a lot of shows do that. So. Unfortunately, JoJo just suffers from the format. But yeah, you have to rate it like it was the first time you ever saw it. You have to try. But I think if we did that, I think if this comes out
while we're doing AniFiles and stuff, I think we kind of maybe not shit all over it, but we don't enjoy it.
I think I would anticipate like kind of a
fascinating to me.
like a morbid fascination. I think would be exactly it.
We would have all been like, oh man, they're doing something with that color at least. You know, we would have all been like, oh, it looks pretty, and that's about it. Yeah.
That brings our total score for the show to a 16 or 80%. The last show we have to talk about is Evangelion. Bird, will you tell us about Evangelion?
I'm gonna try my best. I'm not an expert like you guys, but try my best. I wrote my synopsis, and I will be interjecting. The year is 2015. An alien, which is referred to as an angel, attacks. After an N2 nuclear landmine is used to incapacitate the creature to no avail, its strange alien form regenerating even under the super hot conditions of the nuclear blast, a young boy named Shinji Ikari and his newfound female smoke show friend Misato travel to the UN to meet Ikari's father Gendo, who leads NERV, the final bastion of humanity. He meets his father, who seems like a massive asshole, and dragoons him into military service. And now the Wikipedia used the word dragoon. I've never found a word more suitable than the word dragoon, which means number one, to pilot a ship or ride a horse, and two, to be taken into military service against your will. It means both of those at the same time, which is exactly what happens to him.
Oh, wow.
So he's dragooned into military service as a pilot for a new kind of machine called an EVA. I don't know, an EVA, I think they were saying. I didn't watch the dub, so I don't know how to say it.
Ava.
I think they tend to say Ava, yeah.
So Gendo orders an unconscious woman named Rei to be wheeled out in front of Ikari for no apparent reason, and the girl just so happens to be the biggest waifu anime bait that anyone has ever seen.
True.
After the facility is attacked, and Eva assumes autonomy to protect Ikari from a falling ceiling beam, Ikari is convinced that he must assume command of the ship. He does so, finding it unnatural but not altogether out of place. We are left with a triumphant shot of the Eva standing over the city, likely ready to battle the angel. Now, Dino, if you could, somebody summarizes the show for me even better than I could. And it's only a 2-minute clip. I know we're running against time here, but it's only a 2-minute clip. If I could be permitted, and then we could go right into reviews if you want.
We've got time. Go for it.
It is one of the funniest clips of all time. Here we go.
But there's this big war trying to like basically destroy humanity because humanity has free will, and there's a decision to which level we want to go to. We have free will, so evil's allowed to come and contend, not just good. And the elites themselves believe they're racing using human technology to try to take our best minds and build some type of breakaway civilization where they're going to merge with machines, transcend, and break away from the failed species that is man, which is kind of like a false transmission because they're thinking what they are is ugly and bad, projecting it onto themselves instead of believing, no, it's a human test about building us up. And so Google was set up 18, 19 years ago. I knew about this before it was declassified. I'm just saying I have good sources, that they wanted to build a giant artificial system. And Google believes that the first artificial intelligence will be a supercomputer based on the neuron activities of the hive mind of humanity, with billions of people wired into it with the Internet of Things. And so all of our thoughts go into it, and we're actually building a computer that has real neurons in real time that's also psychically connected to us, that are organic creatures, so that they will have current prediction powers, future prediction powers, a true crystal ball. But the big secret is, once you have a crystal ball and know the future, you can add stimuli beforehand and make decisions that control the future. And so then it's the end of consciousness and free will for individuals, as we know, and a true 2.0 in a very bad way, hive mind consciousness with an AI jacked into everyone, knowing our hopes and dreams, delivering it to us, not in some PKD wirehead system where we plug in and give up on consciousness because of unlimited pleasure, but because we were already wired in and absorbed before we knew it by giving over our consciousness to this system by our daily decisions that it was able to manipulate and control into a larger system. There's now a human counterstrike taking place to shut this off before it gets fully into place, and to block these systems, and to try to have an actual debate about where humanity goes, and cut off the pedophiles and psychic vampires that are in control of this AI system before humanity's destroyed.
Wait a minute.
So
Just this big.
that's a very
It's a
inaccurate
fact.
summary, just for the record.
The beautiful
end
thing
result,
about
though,
that.
actually works for Ava. Like
The fact that he did that on Joe Rogan live, first of all, I could never be as good a podcaster. And second of all, I'm telling you, about half of that is correct. about half of that applies to the plot line of the show. You would just need the names and the settings, but the underlying philosophy is so simple.
the idea of the elites trying to erase the individual to create a hive mind AI is exactly Ava. Like
The beautiful thing about it is that the other half that doesn't apply to Eva applies to Fate Go.
I was gonna say you could also take about 30% of that out and put it for Ghost in the Shell.
Yep.
oh god, it's infinite.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that is so
It's
so
like that
funny.
thing they tell you in film school where you could just take a regular look of face and the things you play before and after it actually determine what people see on it. I forget what that's called, but that Alex Jones clip is that for anime.
Yep, that's exactly right. Oh
Just
man,
see how
that
close
is
we can get.
just to see Joe Rogan's face when it cuts over to Joe and he just looks all scrunch faced like what? Oh, it's great. But
I'll cut to the. Oh wait. Do I do the ratings for this one first? Who does the ratings for this one?
Oh, we can.
well, let's talk
We can
about
rate
first
and
of all.
get into kind of like the seasonal summary.
I
thing.
wanted to ask what about Ava? Do we want to, after we finish discussing the first episode, do we want to talk at all about the ending, or do we just leave that?
No, I've got
I
some things to
actually-
say about Ava. Yeah.
I was gonna say
Okay.
I actually haven't seen it, so this is gonna be very weird for me. I have
Oh
not
man,
seen
it's
the
gonna
rest
be
of it.
double weird because it's Ava.
Yeah.
I've not gotten to the ending. I got a few episodes in, and I was like, all right, that's enough. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, Ava is a show that you can't binge for an entirely different reason. It's so
Yeah.
dense and heavy.
It's like binging. It's binging Ava just feels like slamming the shittiest heroin over and over and over again because it's so dour and it's depressing and it's like it's all of this like terrible shit that keeps happening to children.
This after our conversation on JoJo, this is another show I think where the first episode isn't very strong.
It's weak.
No. I actually rated it pretty poorly. I did not like it. I really didn't like it.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
even going back and like I fairly recently rewatched like pretty much everything Eva for reasons I'll get into here in a minute. And it was funny because I was kind of conflating the first couple of episodes into the first one. It just so happened that I watched the two, kind of back to back, like every time I've watched it. But then it's like, wait a second, the first one unto itself actually isn't everything I thought it was, which was very interesting.
Mm-hmm. It's yeah.
The first episode, you don't even get a fight
No.
in the first episode. Like
You don't get a-
I when I think of the beginning of Evangelion, I think of the slamming the angel into the building and the actual first fight, but
Yep.
Mhm.
that doesn't happen here.
Right.
No, basically all we get here is Shinji whining a whole bunch.
God, that never hit. That never
when
fucking ends.
The way that they show the alien is so unceremonious. It's
Mhm.
just he just walks out from the forest. It's like, wait, this is supposed to be like threatening the existence of the planet, and that's how you showcase this thing?
Mhm.
I think it's consistent because the tone that you get from that is that this is not strange. That this is something that's happened
That's true.
before and will
That's-
happen
yeah.
again.
Fair enough. That's a good point because apparently it was going on for 15 years before the start of the. Which, by the way, the fact that Ava starts in 2015, I think is really funny.
As soon as you said the year is 2015, I was like, oh god.
Yeah. We were watching the movie Click the other day, and in Click, Adam Sandler's father dies in the year 2021. So
Oh, God.
we were all looking at one another like, "Oh, he's coming." We're gonna see him again. Yeah, I love when you get those little moments.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Uh, We
Continue.
we get Shinji whining.
So much whining.
We get
Dude, that's the whole fucking show. Get in the fucking robot, Shinji. Get in the fucking robot, Shinji.
So this would be, I think, a good time to play the Lost 4 Kids intro.
Oh no.
So yeah, there's a joke that like it was never actually aired on 4 Kids, but like, you know, 4 Kids has a reputation for like taking an anime and then like they'll do their own version of the OP. So like the like One Piece one, for example, like it was their own original intro, and they had like, you know, this like kind of like sort of like hip hoppy sort of sound to it. Dean, I think I linked in the in our chat the Lost 4 Kids intro for Evangelion.
Let me get it pulled up and you can keep talking.
Well, so I
have to reopen Discord on this machine.
to sort of set this up a little bit while you pull that up, and then like I'm actually going to use this intro and to be a springboard into kind of my thoughts on the whole series. So I recently, I think maybe about a year ago, I want to say, rewatched the entire series and the films, including like the remakes. So like the Evangelion 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, I think is due to come out like this spring. So that's going to be interesting. And the reason I was doing it is because someone, I was listening to a podcast for an RPG community that I was a part of, and they're talking about how someone was kind of like codifying a particular genre of mecha stuff, like more think like, you know, mech warriors and that sort of deal in a game. And they're saying, it's like, what would it look like if someone tried to codify Evangelion in a game? And I was like, wow, that's interesting, because like you'd kind of have to try to get to the root of what is Evangelion really about. And so I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna take on this challenge. I'm going to try to design a Evangelion RPG that kind of codifies it and the genre in a way, rather than just like straight up adapting Evangelion, because Evangelion's been, you know, adapted into tabletop RPG form before. There's a question as to how successfully. It seemed like a pretty like straightforward adaptation. Like it's like, hey, here's an existing system, and now we're just going to put the EVA setting on it. So I rewatched, and I was like taking because I was like trying to really study it. I was taking notes constantly. I think I mentioned to you guys at one point that like it would take me sometimes like an hour to get through each 24-minute episode, because I'd be pausing constantly to like write something down.
Shit is like reading Heidegger. It's ridiculous. Some of the themes going on in the show are actually a little too highfalutin for the fact that it's an anime.
Yeah. And so I had a very different experience with it the second time through than I did the first one, because I was engaging on a more like academic level, but also because I had since like seen a lot more different anime and had a different read of it now than I did. And I think, Dean, this is a good time, if you got the thing ready, to go ahead and play this
I don't
intro.
have it. I can't find it in any of the chats.
Maybe I might have put it in I put it in our AniFiles chat. No, it's in this one. If you just scroll up, I'll repost it.
Okay. I scrolled up a bit, but it didn't say. Oh no, there it is. I'm sorry. There it is. I got it. That's
Cool.
my bad. I just didn't scroll up high enough. Here we go. This is gonna get muted.
Yep.
Pops.
Oh!
About a boy named Shinji,
Yeah.
living in the flooded streets of New Orleans. Yeah, no, Shinji's father is a scientist, okay? So we built a giant robot for Shinji's birthday. Shinji's friend Rin knows how to bust a cap. When she's not fighting aliens, she's taking a nap. Without acid come from Germany, everybody would be lost. Her country is responsible for the holographic map. She's a big daddy, and I take it for a whirl and use it to help my friends save the world. Now come on, Shinji, let's get this party on. Inking alien, what in your Evangelion? Yo, Shinji, get in the robot. Your dad loves you, get in the robot. Cockpit's too small for a grown-up. Kick some butt in your robot. Yo, Shinji, get in the robot. Your friends love you, get in the robot. Aliens get scared when you show up. Kick their butt in your robot. Yo, Shinji, get in the robot. It's not Eva, it's a robot. Don't eat a rice ball, eat a donut. Get inside that robot.
It's so quintessentially for kids.
Yeah. So like obviously like the
man.
bad localization and like trying to kind of like soften what the show's actually about. Because so what this was is that
There
it's
was a
time.
Holocaust joke in there. That was insane. That was crazy. That was amazing.
So
How did we
at,
get
at
away with
the
that?
at the time the show came out, it was a kind of like shocking deconstruction of a genre that had been very popular leading up to it.
Yeah, mecha. So it starts with like the explosion of it is with Gundam and all the other things that spun out of that, and then we get to Gainax in the what was it in the 90s, the mid 90s or so. They make Evangelion in order to sort of pick apart the things that some of the Gundam series, some of them hadn't really skipped over the idea of what does PTSD do to children. But Gainax really digs into it, and they're like, how horrific is this world where these
Well,
kids are piloting these robots?
even more so, they're kind of deconstructing, I think, the super robot genre. So, and the super robot genre is kind of what that like that video we just played is like. It's obviously meant to be a joke, but like the super robot genre is like, oh yeah, like this young boy gets a giant mecha and gets to go save the world and be the hero, right? It's like it's very. It's a much like kind of younger demographic, and it's meant to be more kind of fun. But then they're kind of picking apart in the same way the Madoka Magica does with Magical Girls. Kind of like let's take a look at the implications of what we're talking about, making a child get into a war machine and do this fighting.
Yep.
And so they kind of, and so when I first watched Eva, it was around the same time that I watched Ghost in the Shell, when I was kind of like first like really getting into anime when I was in college. And I went into it because I heard there was a classic, and it's like of all the, like the mecha shows you're probably likely to have heard of. I think of like you think of Macross, you think of Gundam, and you think of Evangelion. And so I was watching Eva, and so the first few episodes, like it was definitely like you had Shinji whining and stuff like that, but it did feel a little bit more super robot in a sense. Like it just felt like sci-fi, where it's like, hey, cool, you've got this kid who's going to become a pilot for one of these things, and you're going to be fighting. And like it came across as rougher, but I was expecting more mecha action. And what the show kind of turns into is a lot more psychological. It's about the relationships between these people, the implications, and like there's not very much actual mecha action. And that like there's less and less as the show goes on. They do some very cool stuff with it. Like one of my favorite episodes is the one where they reroute all the power in Japan into this like giant sniper rifle they're using basically to take out this Eva that they can't actually
so fucking
kill.
cool.
It's very cool. And so like that was a really cool moment. But then like by the end of it, like I remember watching through it, and like the ending of the series ends in kind of like this weird way. And it's like I'm watching like, okay, I guess I can appreciate that people think this is a classic because it gets kind of heady and a little bit weird, but I didn't really get it the first time around. And so I didn't really enjoy it. And then the second time when I was actually analyzing, it's like, oh shit, like this is amazing. There's like I could talk, like we could probably do, and maybe we should at some point, I don't know, do like a whole special on Eva, but I'm not going to do like the full analysis of it because we'd be here for hours.
Oh yeah, there have been video essay upon video essay that go 2 hours doing actual like analysis of Eva and the messages and all of the different things that they bring up. It's like a weird it's like got a Freudian spin on it, and there's this like psychosexual stuff that's happening, and there's a whole it goes from sort of it's a very realistic sort of take on what happens to a kid when they're forced to be a soldier, plus all this other strange religious iconography, and it's because God, it's insane. There's so much.
I found it hilarious, Bird, when you pointed out that Rey was kind of waifu bait, because this show, in trying to kind of deconstruct and satirize all this different sort of like anime in general and like other entertainment, for kind of like being maybe exploitative and stuff like that, they kind of like created the prototypical waifu. So it's kind of like this unintended consequence of trying to.
So there were no waifus before this girl.
Asuka and Rei are classic waifus. Like Asuka, like there were attractive female anime characters and stuff like that. As anime culture though has spread, Asuka and Rei have kind of become quintessential waifus, and then like everything else kind of revolves around it.
To the point where like a lot of other waifus kind of model themselves after like one of the like 2 or 3 Ava waifus, basically.
Yeah, 3. It's Asuka, Rei, and the
I think
who
Misato.
did you
Misato.
how did you
Misato.
describe her?
Misato, I described as, I'll have the note because I do really believe this. A young boy named Shinji Ikari and his newfound female smoke show friend Misato.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is a smoke
That's-
show. Out of all of them, she was the smoke show.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's
Ray-
absolutely
Ray-
correct.
Ray was like, fucking, oh, she lives down the street. She's cute. It's like
Exactly. And Asuka's different too. Asuka kind of has a sort of pseudo tsundere sort of vibe. She's very much a quintessential type of waifu as well. When she gets
Asuka's
introduced into
great.
the show.
So in satirizing all of these tropes, they've also created a bunch of tropes in the process. I can appreciate.
And I think the creators have actually
Yep.
talked a little bit about that. Like they don't like
Was it
kind of what
intentional?
I
Okay.
think they intended for what happened to have happened. I think the writer of the series and everything like that's actually talked about how he's kind of disappointed with what the community did with what he did.
Mhm.
Oh
And I
yeah,
think
he
they're
hates it.
yeah.
And he tells you how much he hates it when he has. This is a spoiler, but at near the end, I can't remember. Is it in End of Evangelion or is it in the actual end of the series? When
I think it's End of Evangelion because like there's this
when-
whole bit where he actually just kind of like breaks the fourth wall and just like has this thing talking about like the escapism of
he holds up a
yeah.
mirror and he's like, "You fucks ruined my art." Like that's literally
say it
what
quite
End
like
of
that.
Evangelion is. And he has Shinji. So Asuka is hurt,
Who,
and
by the way,
she's
Shinji is also an absolutely stereotypical emasculated boy character. By
Yep.
the way,
Mhm.
Yep.
I think also
and that's
intentional.
yeah, it serves to the point of the show, but at the end of it, because the fans did what they did with Asuka and Rei and stuff, he has Asuka debilitated in a hospital bed, and this is very much a spoiler, but holy shit, that movie's hard to track anyway, so spoilers aren't really gonna matter. And Shinji jerks off onto her unconscious body.
I think he just jerks off into his hand, but
Oh yeah, it is into his hand, but over her unconscious body.
Mhm.
And it's basically, I can't remember the guy's name who created the show,
Yeah,
but
you
he's
know,
like
sometimes you Louis C.K. and you sometimes.
that's what he's saying basically is like, you fucks quit thinking anime girls are hot, you look like dicks.
yeah.
And
So I mean, there's
we
a
all
lot
responded no.
and you can and you can read like pretty much everything in this series on a number of different levels, from like the meta to just like what is the show saying unto itself as a story.
Oh, yeah.
And like, you know, going back to that 4 kids joke, it's like, you know, the whole idea of like Shinji just such like this whiny little bitch and just getting the robot and all this different stuff, but it's like the whole thing, like the whole point of the show is that this is what people want from their shows, and they're saying like, we're going to show you something different, we're going to tell you why what you're wanting from the show is actually like really fucked up. Not to say that you can't enjoy, you know, the super robot stuff for what it is. But it's like what the show is about is something very different. And so like when people sort of project their expectations for that stuff onto this, they're like, I did to some extent, like I was open to it, but I kind of came away from it like, not sure I loved it. And then like when I sort of came to it, not as a classic mecha show, but just as a classic show. And I was analyzing it, like it was like, holy shit, this is amazing.
Mhm.
When you're watching Ava, it's important, I think, to know going into it. And I think this kind of did the show a disservice early on. When it's important to know when you're going into Ava that you're not going into a mecha show. You're going into a social commentary dressed as a
Yes.
mecha show.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a very good point. Which can I say, if we did it for JoJo, we got to do it for all of them. That is not apparent.
Yep.
It is not in the
not-
I
slightest.
think that's
exactly right.
intentional in the sense that they're kind of baiting you into the subversion.
So you would
Yeah.
say that changes and it becomes more apparent that it's a social commentary. kind of
Yes.
it?
Yeah.
It
Okay,
becomes
alright.
what it's entirely about, especially as you get closer to the actual climax of the story. It's
Okay.
entirely a social
Yeah,
commentary.
it seems like a lot of these shows suffer from, oh, we gotta get this out of the way. Explain to you who they are so we could get to the part where it's like finally we can express ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, let's get to the cool shit, but we got to do this
Yeah.
dumb first episode first.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yep.
it's all the more a testament to a show that puts out a good pilot episode. It's how much of an achievement that really is.
Yep.
That's absolutely accurate, because even some of the best shows, I mean, we just talked about it. Some of the best shows that have been made have weak first episodes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so to kind of give a little bit of context for like the franchise, if you will, the series does end the story at the end of the show. And like I definitely, when I first watched it, I got the sense that like they kind of just ran out of budget, because they do it to good artistic effect, but like it definitely feels very different toward the end.
Yeah.
It's a little
there-
cheaper.
there are some like different theories about like what the last episode or two actually is. I think the one that I remember best is that basically like we're in Shinji's head, and this is just kind of him trying to like come to grips with stuff. And there's this whole thing they're talking about, like, oh, what do they call it? It's
That's
the thing,
definitely
like
the
the
last
secret of
episode.
the secret objective of Nerve, and they're actually they're kind of like going against Seal's will. When so like Seal is kind of like the shadowy organization that kind of like controls them, like kind of shadow government sort of thing. They actually kind of like go up against each other at one point. And what Gendo and company are trying to accomplish is like basically like the singularity event, where like all of humanity kind of just becomes like one. I forget it's I'd have to go back and rewatch to like really describe it. But what they sort of suggest, if you read it a certain way, is that what Shinji's going through in his mind toward the end is him trying to come to the conclusion of what is that going to result in. And I think that what they kind of get to is that he decides, and this is also kind of true of End of Evangelion, although they handle it differently, that people should be individuals and we should have society, because like a lot of his struggle is like feeling out of place in the world. People, like it's a lot about relationships and about like we've talked about the hedgehog's dilemma of like if you are by yourself, you're going to die in the cold, and so you try to get closer together so you can warm each other and survive. But if you've got spikes, that becomes uncomfortable. So it's like you need the intimacy, but you also cause each other pain. And so there's just like a lot of themes around that, to the point where like he kind of just like wishes everyone would just die, right? Like he doesn't like other people. He doesn't think he like deserves to live. And then he kind of comes to grips with like, okay, I deserve to be here. It's okay that I'm here. And despite the flaws of people and despite all the pain that we cause each other, I think it's better that we have that than not have it. And so he kind of comes to that conclusion, and that's basically the end of Evangelion.
I can't remember, because they change it between the show and End of Evangelion. It's two different endings. There's a branching ending to this story that one of the endings is the show's ending, the other one is End of Evangelion. And they're both like legitimate.
Before End of Evangelion too, I think there's another movie that kind of like is supposed to sort of, if I remember correctly, I'd have to go back and check. I think that it kind of like follows up that episode by showing like what was actually happening while all that stuff was happening in Shinji's head.
Yes, that was a thing. Yeah.
I kind of consider that to be part of the show's canon, and then Evangelion is kind of the alternate branch. So in a way, you've actually got like 3 endings, or maybe 2.5, depending on how you look at it. I'd have to go back and check.
When I can't remember which ending is, because he totally changes his mind and makes the opposite choice in each ending. So one of the endings, he elects to not unify human consciousness and to allow individual existence to continue. And in the other ending, he elects to unify human consciousness.
So that they can predict the future. And
exactly right.
I think in End of Even. I think it's an End of Evangelion, because that's the one where you got the whole scene of like Ray's head like being in the background while he and Oscar are on the beach or whatever. He basically like his wish that kind of gets turned into what ends up happening, and there's this whole lead up to how this all happens. But basically like kind of his psyche is what's going to decide what the world becomes. And it does kind of go down that route until the very last moment when he kind of he and Osaka are like basically the only two left. And that, so the entire thing kind of like it's again just like the series. It starts off as being like cool mecha action show and like a little bit of intrigue and stuff like that, and then just like the last half of it or so just kind of goes off the rails and just like, what the fuck is happening here?
It ends with this lovely desolate planet and an Adam whose Eve will never fuck him.
Yeah. And the last scene is like just so iconic in my mind, and like there's so many interesting ways you could read it, because like he wishes for Asuka to be there and to be another person, and then when he sees her though, he goes and he starts choking her out, and then she basically just like puts her hand on his cheek, and that gets him to stop. And it's just like there's so many ways.
An idiot.
Yeah. And that basically is the end of the show. It's just them two lying on this like really alien looking beach with a giant ray head in the background. And it's surreal, and like there's so many like interesting ways you can like just read that scene in particular and the whole film. Eva is truly it's a work of art.
It absolutely is. There's a whole meta level to it too, where End of Evangelion only exists because people were angry at the end of the show.
And what I love about it, people were angry at the end
is
of
so
the
sarcastic.
Show. Yeah, like they just like they're End of Evangelion. If people are complaining because you didn't get like the happy ending or whatever it was people expected, it just kind of compounds the fuck you. But in a way that made it that much better as an RP. People
were so angry they didn't get the good ending that he's like, okay, here's your good ending. Fuck everything. He destroys the whole fucking world. It's like, it is great. And it's so sarcastic too, because I believe it's in End of Evangelion, the congratulations scene, which is
the end of the series.
Okay, that's the end of
when
the
everyone's clapping and they're saying congratulations.
So I think the end of the series is he decides to combine everyone.
No, he decides that everyone like he's like, I belong and this is okay, and maybe I forget exactly. I'd have to go back.
I don't know. I might have misread it. I don't even remember. But in any case, it's crazy.
Evangelion is the strangest piece of Christian mysticism I've ever seen.
What's crazy about that is there's all these levels of symbolism you can read in all the crosses and stuff like that. All the especially Christian symbolism that's all the way through it. But the guy who made it was asked about it, and he's like, "I just thought it was cool. Like I didn't mean for it to mean anything.
It doesn't even really matter what he intended. There you look at it.
Yeah, like they like Seal talks about at one point like the things were unfolding as foretold in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it's all totally fictitious.
As if the Dead Sea Scrolls are one book.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So, but yeah, I think basically they were leveraging Judeo-Christian symbology to add a sense of
everybody does, dude. Freaking goths do too.
Otherworldliness. It's definitely not. It's definitely not like using any sort of Judeo-Christian theology in an actual sense. They were just kind of building on like spinning.
No, but it is definitely like Christian pseudo mysticism.
It very much is.
It's very
and you can read just like that. You can read all these different levels into it, and the guy that made it's like, no, it just looks cool. Like the Christian stuff isn't. It's just because that's weird to Japanese people, and so it makes it seem foreign and strange in the market it was made for. Like that's the only reason that's there.
It's fascinating. It really
like if we done the same thing in reverse, there'd probably be a lot of anger about cultural appropriation.
Right. Yeah. But it would be like if the same thing were done in the U.S. and it has been done in the U.S. It would just be a lot of like, right. But it would just be if we were trying to make something from another culture seem strange. They do it with Hinduism a lot in film and media in the U.S. It's like. Because it just seems weird to us.
They do it with other Judeo-Christian religions.
Yep. All right.
It's fascinating. It's so fucking good.
Shall we get into ratings?
You guys all have good ratings for this. Can I get out of the way?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Maybe you guys can persuade me. Did the premise interest? Nia. Eva. The name is too long. The name is very long. Did the premise interest me? No, I didn't know what was happening. And again, I've seen the hits from this one, and I've gotten to a little wearing, but I really have not seen the show, so I don't know much about it. Did the production impress me? What year was this from, out of curiosity?
Like 97, I want to say, somewhere around there.
97.
No, not particularly impressed by it. The alien design was almost like I didn't like it at all. I didn't like most of the designs. I think I'll say that. I didn't like most of Ray's design. I did not like, and I think the reason I didn't like it was because it was so iconic that it almost felt stereotypical. So
Yeah,
that
it's like
maybe
at the
is not going
time,
against it. Yeah, exactly.
it'd be interesting to go back and experience that
Exactly. Like
without
super.
everything
It's
that's
probably
come out
super
of it. Right?
innovative. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's probably so
Yeah.
innovative, but I just don't see it.
Mhm.
Did the storytelling
Adam
impress- Mm.
Adam Kovic talks about it sometimes, where he talks about if you show a younger person Alien, they just complain about the tropes, and it's like,
Yes.
dude, it made the tropes.
Yeah.
Like-
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Did you? Did we lose you?
Have we lost you?
Oh no! I'm back. I've returned.
Okay,
Hello.
cool.
I had a thing. What the hell was the next question? Oh, storytelling. No, and this was my biggest problem with it. That was my biggest problem with it was all of the parts that I would have wanted to see be told were super unceremonious. And all of the things that I didn't give a shit about, but the creator clearly did, he put on a pedestal that I just was not willing to look up at. And that is not a knock against the show, because as you've all testified, it does sort of come together better in the later episodes. So it's not a knock on the whole show, but as far as the first episode go, did very little to tell the story in a way that made me want to pursue it further. So you could count, are you interested to see more? Was no, but it will be yes. And did I enjoy watching the episode? No, but it will. Maybe I'll enjoy the whole series later. So I guess that's a 1 out of 5, but it really doesn't feel like it deserves that. But I'm sure you guys are going to cover that. So,
Well, I mean, and we've talked before about how like even shows that we liked, like they'll end up with low AniFiles ratings just because the questions we're asking. It's like
yeah,
we've even had shows before that like maybe something didn't super impress us in the first episode, but then you watch the whole thing and it's like it's really good as a whole piece. And I think that
I will even say that for the last question, are you interested to see more? Even though it is the only one I said yes to, that one yes I think carries a lot of weight. Because even though I didn't like any of those things, the fact that I still want to see more, I mean that it must have been entertaining, right?
Yeah, it does a
So,
lot of that does a lot of heavy lifting.
yeah, so I will give it a 1, but listeners, it's like a 1 that could easily be a 4 or a 5. I just
Right.
would really need to see the rest of the show to know.
And probably kind of turns into it, like if episode 2 were part of the calculus, it probably turns into a 4 or a 5.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Chris, what are your ratings?
Neon Genesis Evangelion episode 1. Yo, Shinji, get in the robot. The premise interests me. I think that I think I would say yes. And it's hard for me to divorce, especially since I've like this is now my like 3rd time sitting down watching episode 1. It's hard for me to divorce what I know of Ava from what like, you know, how I would look at it as someone who came at it fresh. And so looking at what episode 1 tells us, I think that I kind of have to look at it the way that I did when I first watched it, which is you're following this young boy who has been called basically into like military service out of nowhere. And I think, at least for me, I find that premise kind of interesting. We don't actually get to see him get into the robot, but like just the whole thing of like you find yourself in a situation where like you find yourself like, you know, being volunteered and then actually then volunteering yourself to fight. And that's interesting to me. Did the production impress me? I would say yes. The mats are amazing. I can definitely see the argument, Bird, that you made for like, you know, things being kind of unceremonious, but I found that actually pretty neat. Where it's kind of like, here's what things might look like if this was happening in a real world. It's like you're at a distance.
I actually really agree with you, like in that it's neat, but it was weird because for me, not only was it unceremonious, it was very subtly unceremonious too. So I didn't even pick up on the fact that it was supposed to be normalized. But when you put it that way, yeah, that is very an interesting way to go about it.
And the other thing that's interesting too, and like this is a little bit of hindsight kicking in, but like the way that they sort of establish the state of the world, like all the flooding and stuff that's happening, like that's a result of something that happens. We find out like it happened 15 years ago. That calamity basically caused a third of humanity to be wiped out, and for like, you know, flooding and stuff to happen. But like I think they did a good job of kind of establishing what 2015 Japan is now. and I thought that was pretty cool. So yes, production did impress me. Did the storytelling impress me? In episode 1, I'm not sure. Honestly, I think that because, like I said, I kind of conflated 1 and 2 into the same episode. If that was the case, I would definitely say yes. But in just this first one is a little bit slow. It was a little bit subtle. It was funny. Like the whole reason that Shinji's out there when this emergency is happening is because I guess he got like a postcard, and like they didn't translate the text on the Netflix version, but another subs you'll see that like they translate like, "Oh, I can't wait to meet you, XOXO," and it's like there's something a little bit weird about like this older lady wanting to just like meet a teen boy and like sends him like this like sexy shot.
Stuff begins immediately.
There's a lipstick like kiss mark on the card. Yeah,
it's like this is very weird, but also if you're that teenage boy, it's like hell yeah, like so.
Okay,
but yeah, I think storytelling impressing me like doesn't quite get there just in episode 1, although it was pretty interesting, and I think that the visual storytelling is good, but that also tied into my production point. Did I enjoy the first episode? Yes, in so much as I didn't not enjoy it. I think it more because the premise, like, so what we get is like I said, the reason that I would have found this premise interesting when I first saw it is because like we're about to get into the robot now, and then episode 2 happens, and that so it would have kept me interested. I would have wanted to see what was about to happen there. So that is, I believe, a 4 overall for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, premise, production, not story, enjoyment, and more. Yes.
Yep. Dean?
Yeah. For this show,
I would love you.
I've
to
been
shoot
thinking
like
of
0.
I've been thinking about the scenario interest. Me loving Gundam as much as I do, because I love Gundam. I love Gundam. Gundam is the show that I love.
It's the
and
best.
a whole.
It's the greatest Gundam. The largest Gundam. We built the best.
It's the
Gundam.
greatest anime franchise I think I've ever seen. It's wonderful. It's
people say it all the time. It's the best.
Misato. I mean, what a smoke show she is, Misato. Huh?
Not quite as hot as my daughter, but otherwise,
I would date her.
As far as scenario just goes, look, to me this would read as remembering Gundam, and it would read to me if I were watching this cold as the first episode of Gundam, but it ends right before we get in the robot, and he's less excited to do that. Which would probably be enough for me to be like, yeah, that's cool. And the scenario interest to me is like, yeah. I mean, it's mech. It's a mecha show. Which is how I would read it. So I would absolutely be down for that. I think the show looks really good. The design on the first Angel is not great. But the Ava design is amazing. I love it. Oh, by the way, I forgot my title for this is Yellow Milk Mommy.
You barely get to see the freaking mech in the first episode, dude. It's crazy.
It's true, but it's like it's there and it looms large. And
I felt like I was watching that Godzilla movie from 2014.
I was gonna say, actually,
exactly.
I think in a way, like the first episode is more kaiju than mecha.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I
It very
felt
much
that
is.
way. I felt it was kaiju. Now, is kaiju separate from what was the other one? Super Robot. So Super Robot, Kaiju, and Mech are 3 different styles.
I think they tend to cross over a lot.
kinda.
I'm sure
Like
they-
in
yeah, okay,
in
okay.
Gridman, you've got like mecha and kaiju crossed, but I think
Okay.
kaiju is more strictly speaking like Godzilla and stuff like that. So giant monster.
Yeah.
Pacific Rim
Mhm.
type of
yeah.
thing.
Which,
But
by the way,
then
Pacific Rim was my first introduction to kaiju, and I fucking love it.
Oh, I
yeah, it's
love that
really
movie.
Pacific Rim. The first Pacific Rim is a really good kaiju movie.
Yeah.
So you get and then you get those crossovers like Pacific Rim, which is kind of Super Robot and kaiju. And then you get Mecha, which is generally more like Gundam, where it's usually more sci-fi. It's not as grounded as
Yeah, it's like
Super
military mecha, realistic mecha. Like Super Robot's
Right.
technically a mecha genre, but like I would just call it Super Robot. When I say mecha, I tend to mean like Gundam. Yeah.
Mhm.
Robot. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
there are distinctions, but they bleed together on the edges.
That's what I figured. Yeah.
Like another example of Super Robot to some extent, or at least like it borrows Super Robot ideas, is like
Power
Power
Rangers.
Rangers. when they bring in like the giant, robot.
Oh, okay.
That's another
Makes sense.
example of
Yep.
super robot.
Yes, exactly. Where was I? Production. Okay, I think it looks good. I really do think it looks good. I like the animation on it. I do agree that the art design on the first Angel is not great. It's really hard to it's really hard to forget that later Angels look fucking nuts.
Mhm.
Like, it's really hard to forget that fact
Mhm.
because the Angel design doesn't stay the same. As it goes on, the Angels get progressively crazier.
Mhm.
And there's literally one that's it's literally a floating rhombus. Like, it's like,
Yep.
they do weird shit with it, and it's hard to forget that, but I really do think it looked good. The storytelling, there's a lot of environmental storytelling happening here.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I think it kind of deserves a point for that alone, because we have the postcard, and we have them like driving around, we have the flooded city, we have so much environmental stuff happening. I think
It doesn't hold your hand too much, which is kind of nice.
exactly. So I kind of dig that. Am I accidentally gonna give this a 5, even though it's not a great first episode? I think enjoyment. I don't know if it gets one for enjoyment.
I mean, again, Dino, to be fair, you are just making for my one. If that helps.
Yeah, like I mean, to be fair,
Because
like
there's no way the show deserves less than like a 70, just from what I know about it. So
Right.
like
Mhm.
like for me, like when I kind of like bled my like storytelling thing into enjoyment, and I think that I could easily like swap that one between those two.
oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think
So-
it gets one for enjoyment, frankly, because it's a little dry. It's a very dry first episode.
Mhm.
There's not a whole lot of hook to it. I actually don't think it gets one for enjoyment, but it will get one for interest, because I mean, it's, if at the very least just to see the fight, because the fight's coming up,
Mhm.
and so that kind of cliffhanger
After we've
is-
established that like everything that the UN can throw at this thing doesn't hurt it, then how is this robot supposed to do anything, right?
That's exactly
Mhm.
right. So I think I actually would be interested to see the fight.
All right, then for me, Evangelion episode 1, mommy issues. Did the premise
Yeah.
interest me? No. Based on the first episode, not really interested in the premise. I don't have the love for mecha that Dean does. Did the production impress me? Yeah, I will give it a point. Tend to fall more with Chris in my interpretation of how the angels and things are portrayed. Did the storytelling impress me? Yeah, I will give it a point for that. Similar to Dean, did I enjoy the first episode? Actually, no. As a whole, Shinji is too whiny. God, how long is that final scene where he's standing there and the angel is attacking,
that
and
is
they're
the
like,
biggest problem I think with the show as a whole is that Shinji just like he stays whiny. Like
Mhm.
his character
Yeah.
doesn't
He
just
never
start-
like develops.
no.
he
that
doesn't
point-
start
Well,
just
he-
like doing his job and like being mad about it like anyone else would. He just stays bitchy about it.
I
and
think
it's
that's
like,
one of
ugh.
that was one of the biggest differences the first time I watched it versus the second time when I was like really deeply analyzing it. The first time Shinji was just annoying. The second time, he's very interesting. Not to say that he doesn't get any less whiny or anything like that, but
Mhm.
he is very believable. And in a way, like maybe that's part of why it's annoying, is because like this is how someone might actually act. And what we want is the heroic,
Mhm.
like, yeah, no, don't worry about it, dude. Get over it. Like, your friends love you. Get in the robot. Like, like,
Yep.
like, because that's one of his things is like, does anyone like me? All this different stuff, and like, he goes through what a lot of us do, just that they kind of compress this whole kind of conflict into 12 episodes instead of it being like a lifelong, or the entire period of your adolescent angst.
Yeah.
It's just kind of, yeah. So it's not your typical hero, and I think that's why it kind of rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
Yep. And did the first episode make me interested to see more? I'll give it a
Say
point.
no. Say never. No, never mind.
I'll give it a point. The promise of, because what it looks like, based on how much anime I've seen, is it looks like Shinji's gonna get over his being a bitch and he's gonna pilot the robot and everything's gonna be fine. So I think if I only had seen the first episode, I would still be interested, but definitely having seen the entire series, I'm interested to see more. So a 3 for me, which brings our total score to a 12 or 60%.
60's not bad, especially for a first episode that is a little weak.
Yeah, that's right. I have to keep remembering this is just a first episode rating and not a reflection on the show.
Yeah.
In total.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why going back and doing these specials is kind of weird for us because we do have that context. Usually we are going into the shows blind because we're just watching whatever's new this season. So it does make these ratings a little bit tricky.
All right. That's all the shows we have to talk about, which means it's time for the tournament arc. And we're out of time, so we're just going to jump in.
Yep.
All right, so short version, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to read off 2 shows. You're going to say which one you'd rather watch. Whichever one gets more votes wins. And the top 2 will go on to our winners bracket of like kind of a special tournament for these special episodes. So
here
round
we go.
1.
This program to bring you an important message. Tournament!
Just the one.
Just one.
Just asking. We are once again based off of the first episode only.
Yeah. Well,
It's gonna be hard to do, but kind of try.
Yeah,
because I have a clear bias, and but it's a series based bias and not a single episode based bias. So I just want to know which way I'm going.
I would say really answer with your gut which one you would honestly rather watch like right now, because like even in our end of season tournaments, we talk about how like we go into it knowing also what we know now.
Yeah.
So
that's fair. That's fair.
Round 1, matchup number 1, we have Cowboy Bebop versus JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Which would you rather watch?
JoJo.
Bebop.
Bebop.
That sucks because I really love Bebop a lot.
Yeah, some of these can get hard. I'm also going to say Bebop, so that's 3-1 in favor of Bebop.
Totally understand.
Round 1, matchup number 2, we have Neon Genesis Evangelion versus Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex. Which would you rather watch?
Oof.
Evangelion.
God damn, these are hard.
Ghost in the Shell just did not. I think I was the only one I answered where I said I didn't want to see more.
Yeah. Fuck.
Because it's not the movie. I don't even feel like I need to have brand loyalty to it because it's not even the movie.
Yeah.
I think
CGI intro is disgusting.
It's bad. It's bad. It's really
I'm sure it was very cool at the time, but did not age well.
If I would, which one I would rather sit down and watch right now would probably be Ghost in the Shell.
Wow.
I gotta be in a mood to watch Ava, man. It's like
you ain't always in that mood. I'm usually.
Ryan, did you already vote?
I voted Eva.
Eva. I'm also going to say Eva. So that's 3-1 in favor of Eva. Nice. Right, round 2, matchup number 1. We have Ghost in the Shell versus Cowboy Bebop.
That's an easy one.
Bebop.
Bebop, yeah.
I would probably rather watch Bebop too.
And same. So that's going to be
like you're talking about the number 1 answer for when you Google classic anime.
Classic anime, exactly.
It's not even really, that's
so that's a 4-0 in favor of Bebop. Round 2, matchup number 2, we have JoJo's Bizarre Adventure versus Evangelion.
JoJo. Million years.
Oh, this one's tough for me.
Again, Ava scares me away because I know I need to be in a mood to watch it. Like so I think JoJo.
Two very different shows with very different tones.
Yeah, very
exactly.
Very, one is very cerebral and the other one is like, whoa, look at this.
Yeah.
I know which side of the dividing line I fall on when it comes to watching TV.
Yeah, I think same reason as Dean, I'm gonna go JoJo. I have to be in the right headspace to watch Eva.
And I think having seen what little I have of JoJo and having seen Eva a few times, I think I'm still more interested in Eva personally. That's going to be a 3-1 in favor of JoJo. Third and final round, we have Evangelion versus Cowboy Bebop.
Bebop,
yeah.
I think. Oh damn, that's hard. I think Bebop too.
I answered quickly, but it's a tough matchup. I'd just been thinking about it in the back of my head for, basically the whole episode.
It's so interesting that you would say that that's a tough matchup because even though, and you guys all gave them really high ratings, but even if I may, even when you guys were explaining how much you liked the show, it wasn't passionate. It was just like, I respect this very much. This is a thing, which I totally get that, but it really speaks to the quality of Eva and how I have zero experience with it, and so I don't have that thing, that level of respect for it. It's very interesting.
I think part of that's because it alienates the audience so much on its own that it's like you're going to a museum and looking at paintings, as opposed to watching a painter. You know what I mean?
Yes,
if you're looking at paintings, there's a disconnect there between you and the art. Where if you're watching a painter, like watching Bob Ross or something like that, you can kind of get sucked into it in the process and watching the work happen. And that's Bebop. But Ava's like looking at a finished painting and going, boy, howdy, that's pretty. And I've got no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
Ryan, did you already vote?
Yeah, I voted Bebop.
Gotcha. And I'm also going to say Bebop only because, like, as much as I love Eva, I haven't seen Bebop yet. And so if I was going to sit down and watch one, it'd be that because I need to. But that's a 4-0 in favor of Bebop. And our final matchup of the day is JoJo versus Ghost in the Shell.
That's an easy JoJo.
JoJo.
Damn.
Now, if you like watch like the first 3 episodes of JoJo or the Ghost in the Shell movie, that's a lot harder for me.
That is harder.
Yeah.
With the show, that's an easy one.
God, I just know how good Second Gig is.
Vote your conscience.
Yeah, you're right. Actually,
this is
of the
only
two,
time where your vote will make a difference.
I've seen Ghost in the Shell before. I think I would watch JoJo just because I don't know where it goes.
Yep.
Yes.
And I would probably say the same, just because I was very uninterested in Standalone Complex from what I saw. So yeah, that's a 4-0 in favor of JoJo.
Yes. Nice.
All right. Then.
So did Bebop win the most of those then?
So in fourth place, our least watchable show, Ghost in the Shell.
Ghost in the Shell, yep.
In third place, Evangelion. Second place, JoJo, and in first place, Bebop. I won't give the match record because it doesn't matter. These are all good shows.
Yeah.
Right. They're all pretty solid. I think I like bringing shows that like I like because I enjoy an aspect of them. I did it with Black Lagoon. I know Ryan likes Black Lagoon too, but
I like Black Lagoon. Black Lagoon,
dude,
was
it's great. But there's a level of it that speaks to me, and I like bringing shows like that. And Ghost in the Shell kind of has the same thing.
By the way, on the other spectrum of alienating, Black Lagoon is alienating other end. So Evangelion is like cerebrally alienating, and then that show is just gross. A lot of the times it's just straight up a gross show. I love that show though.
It's so good.
Yep. Well, this has been episode 86 of AniFiles. This show is available on Apple Podcasts or wherever great podcasts are distributed. We live stream this show on Twitch, twitch.tv/Exerci, and I upload the VODs to YouTube on the AniFiles channel. If you like this show, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/AniFiles. And we have a Discord where we talk about anime music, video games, and other things. Link is in the show notes, in the description, or !Discord in Twitch chat. And you can follow us on Twitter @FilesAnnie. This show is a product of Alternative Internet Radio. You can find us and our other great shows at airad.io. And you can follow the network @AltNetRadio. We have a contest happening this season. I put this in my notes for the outro so that I would stop forgetting. At the end of the season, we will do our best and worst of the season tournaments, and whoever has the the best prediction will get a custom-made AMV by our very own Chris.
Oh.
Yeah. So, stick around, see what we think of all the shows we talk about, and then try to guess which ones we like the most and which ones we dislike the most. Bird, thank you for being a guest.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Anytime you guys
you.
do classics, I'm in.
Yeah. You do things on the internet. Where can people find you? What things do you do?
I do one thing on the internet. It's called the Friends Against Government podcast. If you want to check it out, we are also on every podcatcher that you can imagine. Me and my co-host will interview somebody. Dean has been gracious enough to guest us a number of times, and in fact, I would recommend any number of episodes that you find with him. Specifically, one which is entitled Nixium. Go into look in that one, and we'll have a good time with you. Other than that, find me on Twitter at BirdOrchist, and that's it.
I've been your host, Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Exercy or on any list, user Exercy. Chris, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at KRUEGER_Chris. You can also hear some of my past podcasting work on the backward-compatible.com podcast, Games and New Media with a Splash of Academia, and the Doc and Kruger Cast, the official podcast of Doc and Kruger Games.
And Dean?
Yes, I can be found on Twitter at DeanOFiles, just those letters, no other special characters. You can also find my show, Dino Files, on Alternative Internet Radio or wherever great podcasts are distributed. You can read the things that I write sometimes at the Rogue File, roguefile.com.
We'll be back in 2 weeks, back with our regular seasonal anime, talking about Keep Your Hands Off Isaacin, The Case Files of Jeweler Richard, Doro Hedoro, A3, Season Spring and Summer. Look forward to our discussion about that. Asteroid in Love, and Id Invaded. All right, AniFiles cast members, let's say our catchphrase. See you,
See you,
Space
Space
Cowboy.
Cowboy.